Meeting of the Durham Town Council, Monday, December 16th, 2024. We're in the Durham Town Hall Council Chambers, and it's 7 p.m. To take a minute to do roll call, members, if you can introduce yourselves. We are not expecting Councilor Register this evening, who is ill, so we may have one more councilor joining us during the meeting. So can we start with Councilor Grant?
Heather Grant.
James Buber.
Todd Selig.
Sally Needell.
Joe Friedman.
Wayne Burton.
Eric Lund.
Daryl Ford.
All right. I move that we approve the agenda as written. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Councilor Lund. Any discussion? We're good? Okay. Because there's no one on Zoom, we can just raise hands for, I didn't even say it yet. All those in favor? All those opposed? Unanimous, thank you. No special announcements tonight. Public comments, next. Please make sure you give us your name, where you're from, and you have 5 minutes.
Joshua Meyer with 7 Chesley Drive. The town of Durham rightly prides itself on its transparency and on responsiveness to public input, including your welcoming public comments here. In that context, I wanted to express to you and to citizens watching concern about the well-intentioned rush by town officials and the planning board to rush through a major change in the definition of student housing without yet fully informing the public about the context for that effort and its implications for downtown neighborhoods. As you probably know, the planning board is scheduled to hold a public hearing on January 8th on the, quote, proposed ordinance prepared by ad hoc group working with town administrator. The stated intent of the planning board is to get that passed pretty quickly, maybe even that day, which raises questions about what type of public input is really being welcomed at the public hearing. And then it's to be sent pretty quickly to you, the council, for rush approval. The plan is for Durham to act preemptively, to undermine expected proposed legislation in Concord, to undo Durham's 3 unrelated tenants rule. I was involved in support of Todd's effort in fighting earlier bills along these lines, so I understand the concern and a little bit of the terror. Also, I did learn today that Representative Diane Poyer, the new chair of the House Municipal and County Government Committee, has taken steps in this direction, but I was also told that there's considerable bipartisan opposition to such a bill. But how many other Durham citizens are aware of this context? That's my concern. The planning board posted the proposed ordinance as blessedly brief, just 5 pages, but as I mentioned to the planning board on December 11th, the document is also distressingly deficient in any detail or context. And almost no one I've spoken to in Durham, including citizens who usually pay close attention to such matters, is clear about what is being proposed, and some debates on Facebook are completely uninformed. Even planning board member discussions indicate some struggling with the clarity of the implications. If there are posted minutes for that ad hoc group, I have not seen them, but citizens can, those watching can, see a summary, a paragraph on the planning board site for the proposed ordinance. I recommend people look at that. One has to read between the lines of the text of the proposed ordinance to realize that what we commonly think of student rentals in the faculty neighborhood with up to 3 unrelated students would no longer be student rentals by definition, even if a 4th unrelated student were added. Faculty neighborhood neighbors who have struggled with the lifestyle gap between families and college undergrads will have concerns, and faculty neighborhood homes will become 33% more financially tempting to absentee landlords and therefore less affordable to families. Now, there are some overall good reasons for the proposed ordinance, and it has positive elements, such as not allowing more than 5 students in a residence to be allowed in the residential neighborhood, so that's good. And Heather Grant opened up possibilities of nurses living together, people who are not students at all, to include, to expand our workforce housing options. But most Durham citizens have not heard the details or understood the context of the pros and cons. So I'd recommend everybody watch the November 13th planning board meeting, or at least read the minutes to see Representative Al Howland's legislative context explanation. And thus far, Planner Michael Barrett has declined to follow the suggestion that I made and mentioned by at least one planning board member that he prepare an extended document explaining the unstated implications, unstated in the document, implications of the changes with specific examples. In the final minutes, minutes meaning time of the December 11th Planning Board meeting, no minutes, written minutes yet available, Michael stated that this is not his responsibility, that Todd and Audrey should work on this. Rasmussen does not know if that's started. Also, the scheduling of the public hearing for that as the last of 4 public hearings on January 8th, including on the Mill Plaza site enhancement plan, is not really a recipe for extensive public input. And as I stated before at the planning board, the more public hearings you have at one meeting or one meeting 1 week in combination with the council, the less that functionally acts as an invitation for meaningful public input. Now, to be clear, I'm not speaking in favor or opposition of the PROS ordinance. I'm speaking in favor of the need for an informed public. The proposal is a gamble. It might halt aggressive actions in the municipal committee. It might encourage them to be even more aggressive. So if there's a rush in a town like Durham to move like this, there should be a rush to inform the public, maybe with an additional meeting before January 8th, where in a public, where it's available in live or on Zoom. So I just hope that something like that happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak this evening? All right. We have Diana Carroll with us tonight on Zoom. Go ahead, Diana. You're muted.
Okay.
There you
I
are.
hope that's taken care of.
Yes.
Please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm quite welcome to, I'm very able to increase the volume of my voice. So, my name is Diana Carroll, and I live at 54 Canny Road. This evening, I would like to speak to a quality of leadership that I have seen demonstrated in our town of Durham for the last 50 years. That's correct, 50 years. John and I moved to Durham in 1974, and here it is already 2024. The examples of vision I would like to highlight were all begun by single residents, a group of residents, a committee, the town council, the town administration. Their vision proceeded forward, picked up momentum, and many of these visions are now a part of our town, so that many in this town that we dearly love. I hope the following few examples clarify what I am trying to communicate. Let's start with Wagon Hill Farm, which was for sale a couple of decades ago, and the town, as I remember, had first option on buying it. The purchase needed to go to a town-wide vote, but before the vote, there was a hard-fought battle. There was a side that wanted to preserve this land for town use, for the use of residents and others. There would be trails, there would be available picnic places, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was one side. Then there was a side that said, let a commercial developer develop Wagon Hill. Then 5-acre house plots for very expensive houses could be built, and the town would reap incredible property taxes for years to come. And I'm sure there were other sides to this issue. We know today that Wagon Hill is a Durham gem. It took vision and then hard work, and might I add, it took some diplomacy. Other examples. The swap shop at the Durham transfer station. I remember this project quite well. At a meeting of the recycling committee, and this is probably about 15 years ago, Joyce Sheffield suggested to the recycling committee to bring forth the idea of a swap shop. 2 other members, Jesse McCone and Tracy Woods, said they would begin work on this project. And they did. You wouldn't believe the legal issues the committee and, of course, the town had to deal with in bringing forth a swap shop. After the swap shop was up and running, I myself heard the buzz on Main Street on Saturday mornings when one person would tell their companion what they found at the swap shop that morning. And this continues today. And other examples, quickly. The Town of Durham Library, a vision that really picked up momentum and continues to gather momentum. Another, Durham was the first municipality in New Hampshire to have curbside pickup of recyclables. The first. And this came from our Public Works Department. The Downeaster Amtrak train. How many people thought 20 years ago that we would have a train coming through Durham 10 times a day, making 5 trips north and 5 trips south every day? The train, the Downeaster, actually is a project more of UNH, but it is one that Durham cooperates with extensively. So I bring forward to you these examples of vision to say that a budget, a document we think of containing only dollar figures and dates, must also include vision. Vision for the future. And it's a time to be grateful for all those people before us who had the vision to work and plan to see that Durham would be a place where people could live with a real quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
You have another hand on Zoom.
Robin Mower.
Okay.
Good evening, Robin Mower, 6 Britton Lane. I'm going to try to read some text that I fairly quickly threw together here.
Okay. We still have Diana on the Zoom.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And we don't have Robin on Zoom. I don't know.
I'm not showing my video.
Okay, that's fine.
Deliberately.
That's fine. We just,
But Diana, you need to mute.
she's off
gone.
now. She's off now. So,
Okay.
go ahead, Robin. Thank you.
Do we drop everyone?
Robin, are you still there?
Robin's muted.
Oh, okay, Robin, you need to unmute.
I did.
Oh, now we can hear you now.
Okay, here we go. So I want to echo Josh's observation that it appears that very few residents know of or anything about the proposed amendment. I think that all of us who have heard John Randolph talk about the challenges of hiring and retaining employees are more than sympathetic to the need to improve housing options. But it cannot have gone unnoticed that except for a small handful of residents asking specific questions about the proposed ordinance, the preponderance of voices you've heard from the public, including many non-residents, have simply emphasized the lack of housing and a desire to live in Durham. How many residents have weighed in? How many know about this? I think that we have a silent majority who know little to nothing about it. And I think that we need to know what some of the impacts might be, including financial impacts. So I'd like to suggest that the council delay a decision about the amendment until a single issue notice is sent by the town through the Friday Updates listserv, so that awareness becomes in essence unavoidable. And that notice should be enhanced not by the language of the ordinance itself, but a thoughtfully crafted context and explanation for the need and for some of the specifics in the ordinance. The second is more specific, and it's about the ordinance itself. So there's a section called perpetuity. It says all attainable housing units must remain as attainable units in perpetuity in accordance with HUD figures and the conditions of project approval. As part of any project, appropriate provisions such as deed restrictions or easements shall be incorporated to carry out this requirement. The town of Durham or their agents may require periodic reporting and audits at its option. I suggest replacing the word may with shall in the last paragraph. Some other New Hampshire towns do require reporting, so Durham would not be unique. In addition, on July 17, Tom DiCapo, a retired attorney with a high-powered Boston law firm and at the time of writing, a regular planning board member, wrote a memo to the board about the draft ordinance. He proposed an income averaging approach, which made its way into the final draft. But he also wrote about a way to ensure that our intentions in passing this ordinance are met not just at the start, but throughout the life of any housing developed. And I'll read the one paragraph only, but I suggest that you should take a look at his memo. Once again, that was July 17, I think, and it's posted at the Housing Task Force website, I think. So he says, the property owner would certify annually that it was meeting the ordinance requirements. The town would have audit rights, which it could exercise as frequently or infrequently as it wished. I would recommend building in a requirement that the project owner fund an outside audit review once every 5 years. This would work into their operating budget. In the event that it was determined that there was a material failure by the property manager to follow these requirements, the penalty could be an increase in the percentage of units required to be qualifying units for some period of time in the future, such as 5 years. Mr. DiCapo also noted, please give this approach serious consideration. If anyone has concerns about feasibility, I would strongly suggest that a subgroup of the board have a feasibility discussion with the potential developer rather than substituting our judgment for theirs. So I wonder, has a subgroup of the planning board held any feasibility discussions with any developers? Thus, I would like the council to ask our town planner to address these points before the council deliberates. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
No one else on Zoom.
Okay. In that case, we will move on. There's no report from our UNH student rep because she's on break. So she is not here. So we'll go straight to committee appointments. And we have 3 this evening. Ooh, crash. The first is an appointment for a regular membership position for the planning board to appoint Gary Whittington of 6 Old Piscataqua Road. Would you like to come up to the podium in case anyone has any questions for you? Or just want to introduce yourself, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Gary, the applicant, and I just wanted to make myself available for questions. Would you like a preliminary curriculum vitae?
Just
Or
sort
have
of,
you-
sure, let's just sort of summary of your background.
Okay, I moved here about 18 months ago from Iowa City, Iowa, where I'd lived for 35 years. I'm a native Texan. I'm a retired commercial real estate lawyer.
Okay.
During my career, I was qualified in New York and Iowa. I spent the first 5 years of my career at a Wall Street law firm, and then lateraled to a large financial conglomerate where I became an expert in commercial mortgage debt in Iowa for Aegon, the parent company, the Transamerica Corporation, and that's what I did the last, for the 25 years of my career before I retired. So as part of my job, I was just all real estate all the time, and had a lot of contact with development issues and so forth. That said, I think I would bring as much humility as I can, knowing that I don't really understand the town as well as a lot of others, and so I would really want to spend, I don't think, my assertiveness, let's just say, would grow over time as I got more confident that I understood the town as well as everyone else here.
Yeah.
So, but I really want to just be of service as best I can. So, for example, issues like, preparing a any kind of written synopsis of the effects of, the proposed change we just discussed. That would just be right in my wheelhouse, I mean, that'd be what I would do all day during my career. So I could just respond to any questions. I just want to contribute to my new home. And so
Great.
that's why at James Bubar's encouragement
Badger.
and goading,
In a box of pearls, probably.
I'm applying.
Wonderful.
So-
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
A comment that the state every year puts out an updated land use regulation handbook, which it would probably be a good idea for you to acquire a copy so that you can see the differences between New Hampshire law and law in jurisdictions you're more familiar with.
Absolutely. I think that my first job will be to solicit a reading list, so.
Looks like
One of these. Councilor Burton.
Was Iowa a home rule state? Because one of the myths about New
No.
Hampshire is we can't do anything as a council that the state doesn't authorize us to do. Does Iowa have that same dilemma?
No, Iowa has more home rule.
Well, get used to it because there's a special committee on housing being formed in the legislature, and they're not looking to respond to us necessarily. So we'll need a really strong planning board, and I think you'd make a great addition.
Councilor Freeman.
I just want to say thank you for volunteering to serve, and I appreciate your approach of, sounds like doing a lot of listening first and getting acclimated as you do. So good luck with it. It sounds like you have a good background for it.
Anything else? All right, in that case,
I just hope my neighbor doesn't end up hating me.
it's a chance you've taken.
It's about a 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, absent this, it's maybe 50-50 at best, yeah.
In that case, I move the Durham Town Council does hereby, upon recommendation of the Planning Board Chair, appoint Gary Whittington, 6 Old Piscataqua Road, to fill an unexpired regular membership position on the Planning Board with a term expiration of April 2027. Do I have a second? Second. And let's do a roll call vote.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Sonia Dell, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
Welcome to the Planning Board.
Thank you, I'm honored.
Okay.
Fire is in April.
I just realized, I think,
Oh.
We didn't know.
We didn't know.
I realized I had forgot to turn my camera on when I joined, and so it maybe didn't register. I joined during public comments.
So before we do our approval, just need, I think the wording is that we need to know why you aren't in attendance.
I do not have childcare.
Okay. So we just need to just do a yay or a nay in terms of allowing her participation on Zoom.
Heather Grant, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Sonia Dell, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Okay. Very good. Welcome. Okay.
Does she get to vote on the appointment?
I think that's done.
It's done.
So it'll be
It's
the next
done.
item.
It'll be the next item, which is, I know that we had Chris Gowland, 28 Newmarket Road. We voted to have him join Parks and Rec as an alternate member, but now there's an opportunity for him to be a regular member, to take on an unexpired term. Any questions before I make a motion? Okay. I move the Durham Town Council does hereby, upon recommendation of the Parks and Rec Committee Chair, appoint alternate Chris Gowland, 28 Newmarket Road, to fill an unexpired regular membership position on the Parks and Rec Committee with a term expiration of April 2025. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Councilor Grant? Any more discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call vote. We can start on this side.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Sally Nadell, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
M. Friedrichs, aye.
Okay. Sounds unanimous. Very good. So Chris will take that more official seat. And lastly, we have one more. Peter Yost is with us tonight. It's been recommended to join the IMAC, Integrated Waste Management Advisory Committee. And I had the good fortune of being at a meeting with Peter and know that he'll be bringing a lot to the committee. Do you want to just stand up and introduce yourself? Thank you, Peter.
Sure. Peter Yost, 32 Wortham Road in Durham. My wife and I moved here about 3 years ago from Brattleboro, Vermont. I'm a building enclosure consultant. I'm trying to figure out how to slide into retirement. The only thing I haven't determined is the slope. But I worked pretty hard on a lot of resource efficiency issues when I was here in graduate school in the recon department. And Brattleboro has a pretty progressive way of managing waste, and so they have a curbside composting program, and a couple of people, Julie Kelly and Will from the university, got me interested in what I could bring to the committee, so that's why I'm here. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Great.
Okay.
Sounds great.
In that case, I move the Durham Town Council does hereby, upon recommendation of the Integrated Waste Management Advisory Committee Chair, appoint Peter Yost, 32 Worthing Road, to fill an unexpired regular membership position on IMAC, IWMAC, with a term expiration of April 2025. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Second from Councilor Grant. Any discussion? All right, we'll start on this side.
Heather Grant, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Sally Nadell, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
M. Friedrichs, aye.
All right, sounds unanimous.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. It's awesome. All right, we have one unanimous consent agenda item. Does anyone just want to see it pulled before I read it? All right, here we go. I move that Durham Town Council shall unseal the non-public session minutes from the year 2007, dated February 5, October 15, and December 17, and from the year 2008, dated January 14 and January 28. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Lund. So we'll start. I'll start. Sally Nadell, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Councilor Friedrichs?
Aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Okay. No one opposed? All right. So we'll move on to continued deliberation of our budget. I'm going to start the discussion just by making a motion to approve the budget, and then we can second and then get into any further discussion that anyone wants to have. I move the Durham Town Council does hereby adopt Resolution 2024-26, approving the FY 2025 operating, capital, and special fund budgets and the 2025 to 2034 capital improvement plan with amendments. Is there a second?
I second.
Second. All right, from Councilor Ford. Okay, open for discussion, amendments, motions? Yes?
The way that any amendments would come into that motion would be to make an amendment right now, for instance?
Yes.
So
Yep.
I would make an amendment that the,
Or you can just make a motion, and it will become an amendment.
excuse me.
Sure.
I'll make a motion that the EV chargers not be included in the budget, the 2 EV chargers that are projected to come into the budget,
Okay.
unless they were to receive the 80% grant that has been applied for.
I'll second that.
Second that, Councilor Bubar? Okay. So a question for Todd, then would we put into the budget only the funds that we would need minus the 80% that we need from the grant fund?
No, because the way the grant is structured, it is a reimbursement to the municipality after the municipality has already spent the money. So the money needs to be in the budget to be able to expend to take advantage of the grant. What we could do is simply agree that if we don't receive the grant, we simply won't move forward with the installation. And we would learn whether we receive the grant or not prior to moving forward with anything. My thinking in the way I've structured this to date is that we've applied for the grant. I think we have a decent chance of getting the grant, although we and UNH have been unsuccessful for 3 years in a row now, but I think we have a decent opportunity this time. If we got the grant, we would make the investment, install the chargers, seek the reimbursement, but I recommend that even if we don't receive the grant, we'll wait until we find out one way or the other, but if we don't receive the grant, we'll still move forward with the installation. And my rationale is that the installation of the 2 4-handled EV chargers, one for Depot Road lot and a second for the Pettybrook metered lot, allowing us potentially to move the 2-handled EV charger from the Pettybrook metered lot into the Bobcat Corner lot, also known as the Store 24 lot, or the Sammy's lot, or the Robbie's lot. That is completely consistent with our goals, our climate action plan. It helps to, I believe, support downtown businesses in that potentially EV people might choose to come to downtown Durham to shop or eat because they can charge their car. And it's a statement of our values, I believe. But I think the other argument is that, or question is it Durham's responsibility to provide EV chargers for individuals who have electric vehicles? We certainly don't provide gas pumps for people with a fossil fuel car, and that's a very fair conversation. So I guess this is a long way of saying that if the council was to vote that I would not recommend modifying the budget, but I would say if the budget passes, if this amendment were to fail and the budget passes, the council could make a subsequent motion asking that we not spend the monies unless we've received the grant. And I would, of course, honor that. So there's a way forward, I think.
Todd, could you also clarify that, the EV chargers that the town has installed are all revenue generating? They're never free. The people who use them have to pay to use them. So could you remind us of what the return on investment window is? How long would it take before the town is actually getting revenue from having additional EV chargers installed?
So first, let me say that the $60,000 budgeted would not tap into the general fund, but rather into the municipal transportation improvement fund that we have set aside. And that is funded by a $5 surcharge on every motor vehicle registration. And those monies are able to be used for various transportation initiatives. It could be pedestrian-focused initiatives, bicycle-focused initiatives, EV-focused initiatives, sidewalks, or even roadways if we chose to. So I'll first just say this won't impact the general fund. In terms of the EV charging stations, we do charge for use. The meters are not free downtown, and we try to not only recoup the energy used, but also we add a charge for parking itself. I don't have the return on investment in hand.
With the 80%, my guess is it would probably be in the 7-year range. But again, we'd have to look at that. It's, the EV stations are not a high revenue center for us. It's, I view them more as a service.
What's the lifespan of the chargers? Effective life, useful life, whatever.
My bet is it would be a 10 to 15 year useful life. We've had the chargers in place for upwards of 8 or 10 years now, and they're working effectively. You'll remember that we've gone through 2 chargers at the Durham Public Library in this time, but that was because we were using a residential charger that Siemens donated to us. And we've replaced that now with a charge point charger, which allows us to charge for usage. And the charge point chargers are industrial scale type chargers. So we have had, periodically malfunctions, just as we do with our pay and display meters, but those have been addressed by Public Works as that occurs.
But it also sounds as though absent subsidies, it's probably not cash flow positive.
I would concur, yes. And the 2 existing chargers we have in the Pettybrook metered lot were both leveraged with grant funding, and Durham and UNH shared the residual cost 50/50.
So just a question then on top of this is, have we checked on what other communities charge, or the hotels and the other areas that have installed, so that we could at least just charge a competitive price? I mean,
We
it's
certainly
something we should do.
can. Because we were an early adopter of EV stations downtown, and so our use of them has evolved. For the last several years, we've been trying to match offsetting the cost of energy and matching what it would cost someone in a non-EV vehicle to park downtown. So there was parity between the EV spaces and the non-EV spaces, and that was the goal. But if we are interested in charging a more market-based rate, we could. To a certain degree, I've looked at the EV stations as a loss leader. It's a way to demonstrate our commitment toward sustainability and encourage the transition to EV and hybrid vehicles in town. And it helps attract people, hypothetically, to downtown too, who might come to Durham to shop and eat versus somewhere else that doesn't have the availability of such meters. So,
Whole Foods used to have 3 EV chargers, and they pulled them all out.
and this has been an active topic of the Energy Committee, and we're fortunate to have Jack Lanneman, who really is our EV charging station guru, who does the reporting, and every 2 or 3 years we review pricing and update that. So that's something we could bring to the Energy Committee to talk about.
And I would mention, because Jack has been reporting this so wonderfully, and Councillor Lund may have something to add, but since I'm there as a rep from the planning board, the usership of our EV charges has been increasing quite considerably, and that was one of the things that justified the second handle. So we are seeing a lot of people making use of those EV chargers when visiting downtown Durham.
Yeah, the usage has dramatically changed for the first several years. They were very sporadically utilized, then there was moderate usage, and now they're often not available when other people want them because the popularity has increased. So,
Well, I would think that, I mean, it's nice to offer it as a service, but at the same time, there should at least be something earned on them that isn't, causing us almost to be like the lost leader of the group, because I think they're more prevalent. I mean, they're banking them over at hotels and all over the place. It just seems like we should at least be making some money on it. I mean, if we're struggling on budgets, we're struggling with all of the other things, we should be looking at where we can increase parking fees, and that includes the EV chargers as well.
and just to clarify, we are making some money on them, which is in parity with the non-EV spaces. So we tried to create parity across the lot, and the lots do generate revenue for the town.
Part of my concern would also be that they are supporting mostly non-residents.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be an apartment dweller in town who struggles to charge, so they come to use the public meter. I don't know. We don't have data on that.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that my reasons for making the motion were for one, what Councilor Bubar had said, which is we don't really know how many Durham residents are using them versus non-Durham residents, but we also do know that it is not all Durham residents. It's a free market thing. When we get gasoline, we go to a gas store. If there was a market, and I can understand why hotels would do it, they want to draw a certain clientele that happens to drive an expensive vehicle. Most of them are, well, not, I won't go too far about that, but
Well, they probably
there's a
make
reason
money
for a
on them,
hotel
too.
to offer amenities, and that would be an amenity to a hotel. But for Durham to pay $60,000 for the taxpayers, most of which I would guess would not be using these chargers, is why I made this motion.
Yeah.
Can you restate where the funding the $60,000 will come from?
Sure, from the Municipal Transportation Improvement Fund, which is a separate fund that is generated from a $5 surcharge on motor vehicle registrations, and we're able to use those dollars on transportation issues, but also alternative transportation issues or pedestrian related issues. And historically we've used the funds to install, to do painting of crosswalks downtown, to improve sidewalks and tip downs for pedestrian access, to help with bike lane installation. And we have used it periodically to fund portions of the road program. This year, we have a $30,000 allocation for the RRFB device on Mill Road, which, again, to clarify, we would align that with the Mill Plaza project, so they move forward in parallel. And we also have a few $1,000s that would help to support the UNH Cat Tracks program, which is those are free bikes to use that would be available to Durham residents as well as the student body, and that helps get people out of their cars and walk or bike, well, bike in this case.
And
So-
this $60,000, a large portion of that, if we get the grant, would be reimbursed to that fund?
Yes, if we get the grant, it is an 80% reimbursement. And so, I mean, one friendly amendment I might suggest would be to not expend the money for the 2 EV chargers unless we receive the 80% grant. And that would accomplish what
I
you're...
believe that's close to the motion that I made.
So what would we,
It's not the motion you
It's
made.
not the motion you made. The motion was to not put the money in the budget unless we got the grant. But from the description, it's reimbursement. So we would need to have the money in the budget to be able to take advantage of the grant.
but this is budget money that is not impacting the taxpayers. It's coming from a special fund. It's not part of the taxing.
Well, if the money that was in the transportation fund was instead put towards, say, Madbury Road sidewalks, which would fit in that category, there'd be less money the taxpayers would have to pay for that Madbury Road project. So it does have a real economic impact on the town.
But this is coming from a separate fund, and the EV chargers have been heavily analyzed. They get a lot of use. You shared a very interesting article about how having EV chargers, particularly, I mean, these are not high speed, but they tend to increase business visits around them. That was a very interesting article that Councilor Friedman shared with the town. And so there are very measurable, quantifiable bits of information around the EV chargers. If we compare that to some of the other uses of this transportation fund, such as the flashing lights, there's no proven quantifiable data that those do anything to actually increase safety. And as someone who frequently crosses at one of those flashing lights with an infant in a stroller and has yet to have people stop, I really go with the quantifiable data that shows that the EV chargers are getting a lot of use, and their studies show that they do support downtown businesses around them, in addition to being connected to our measurable climate goals.
Yes, Councilor Burton.
I was on the town council and on the energy committee when we put in the first charger, and it was not to benefit Durham's residents. The charger was installed to pursue our goal of reducing the carbon footprint of Durham, whoever was causing it. And that's when Harry Tobias, who is a technician for the company, was able to get a grant. And I think among the many firsts we had as a town was we were the first town to install a charger in a public place to encourage people to reduce the carbon footprint. And that's where it started. So it wasn't necessarily done just to benefit Durham residents, but benefit the world, if you want to put it that way.
And I don't mind them being purchased. I just think we should be charging for them so that we are actually getting some earnings off of them, because it's a time to do it. That's just my opinion.
Yes, please.
So just to read from our application letter to the Federal Highway Administration from August, our proposed EV charging sites are part of a well-integrated effort by the town of Durham to reduce carbon emissions. Our GHG emissions survey indicates that 40% of these emissions in Durham are from the transportation sector. Because the town is committed to a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 42.8% by 2030, and a goal of zero emissions by 2050, expanding EV charging is a top priority. At community level, our proposed charging sites meet several important needs. One, is home to UNH, a STARS Platinum level sustainability university, and one of the state's largest employers. We have a unique opportunity to support EV among employees, students, and visitors. Two, as one of only 3 Amtrak stops in New Hampshire and the only one with a large municipally owned parking lot, we're excited about the possibility of adding EV charging for commuters, effectively turning Durham into a green commuting hub. 3, as one of the most densely populated towns in the state, Durham has many multi-unit residential properties. Our goal is to increase EV charging opportunities for those residents who do not have access to private garages. And just again, we do charge for usage. Again, it's something we'll continue to follow, but we offset our electrical charge and we make a modest profit. Again, in parity with the non-EV users. So.
What you're saying is you're paying for the electricity plus the cost of the parking. That's not the same as making money for the fact that you've invested into the chargers, is all I'm saying. Because you would be using that parking spot for a non-EV person, so they'd be there either way. So I just think that there should be a reasonable fee that creates a profit, because we're purchasing, even with a grant, we're putting money against something and we should be getting something back, besides just, covering our electricity and the fact that the space is there and being used as a parking fee.
And I think that's something we can talk with Jack Lanneman about and talk about at the Energy Committee and evaluate further.
Yeah.
It'd be a nice problem to have if we get the additional.
Our business manager would love to jump in too.
We can change the funding for that to 12,000 from the Municipal Transportation Fund or somewhere else, and 60,000 and 48,000 from a grant. So unless we get the grant, we can't spend the money. So we can change that funding. We can change the funding source for that project.
But we need to upfront the money, and if we haven't.
On the expense side, it would still be the 60,000.
Okay.
But we can't spend the 60 unless we have the appropriate revenue, which would be funded by a grant in the transportation
So
fund.
we don't need the motion.
So we would just change on the 1, 2, 3, the fourth whereas, we would just change the amount that's coming from the municipal transportation fund.
But that means that we're taking money from the municipal transfer fund that we're not putting into the other things, right? Again, Sidewalks is a very good example. We have a number of pretty cruddy sidewalks in town, one which I walk quite frequently. So I think it's important that we're trying to get the grant money at that level, and I'm worried that that's going to then not get shifted correctly. Is it still,
We would only be able to spend the 60,000 if we had the grant coming in.
right? So what happened, what are you talking about with the 40-something thousand on note, whatever? in the
That's
budget?
the 80, is that the 80%?
The 80%, 48,000.
Right, and that would be, that would show up in the budget as revenue?
As revenue under a grant.
Yeah.
Versus revenue from our capital reserve fund.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
It's not complicated.
Councillor Bubar?
I'm not that intimate with our climate study, but I was under the impression that a lot of the carbon was based on vehicle counts driving through town. And so how does having an EV charger actually impact the way the study is put together? I mean, we don't count EVs driving through town, we just count cars.
That is a fair assessment, and I don't have a good solution to that because of the way our limitations in calculating the transportation
Yeah.
impact. We don't have Durham-centric data, it's regional data that we're allocating across Durham.
Madam Chair?
We don't have regional data around EV cars either. We can't even take a percentage, anyway, never mind.
Yeah.
Madam
We
Chair?
do have regional data for EV cars, and we
Sure.
are now collecting Durham-specific EV registrations. But it's true that in terms of, if we assume that visitors are coming in to use those spaces, right, we can't tell how many people are fueling up at gas stations versus how many people are using. We do know how many people, we have a rough estimate, but it's not worked into our climate plan because Jack Lanneman is able to calculate and updates each month how much carbon is offset through the EV charger. So you can figure out how many miles were traveled and how much carbon is offset by that. But we don't have it's a very imperfect estimate because all we have is estimated amounts of traffic in Durham. So we have an accurate measure for the EV charger and how much carbon that offsets. We only have a general estimate for how much traffic is coming through Durham.
But
And then we
that
do
carbon
have-
offset is a regional carbon offset if it's someone from out of town. It's
No,
not
because
just,
it's based on how much electricity is charged at our stations. So it's an exact count of how much electricity is going into vehicles.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councillor Bubar?
The context of our adopting this 8-9 years ago was that the country was putting together a network of charging places. So to encourage people to buy EVs because, and then Durham was in a strategic place that needed an EV. When Charlie Forsey looked at the map, Charlie was chair of energy and an expert on this stuff. It was done, there were several reasons. One, it would attract people to come to Durham and shop because they would come and charge their vehicles in the parking lot. And so that was another reason that at that time we installed that. And this discussion about the financing, the smaller the dollars, the more we discuss it. But that was the context of when we first put the EV in. It was one of the first publicly available charging places. If you looked at the map, if you were trying to travel to Maine or something, here was Durham with a charger in their parking lot. And that was the context, I believe. Todd, you were in on all that too, I know, so.
Councillor Freeman, do you want to reword your motion? Or, yes,
Well, I'll just say, I think it's very challenging for EV chargers to cost out without a subsidy in the form of a grant. So if that is, but initially going to this, my assumption was that the town was really committed to the climate action plan. The Energy Committee was very supportive. We pursued the grant. And pursuing the charging station, whether or not the grant was received, was something Durham would support. If the feeling of the council is we should only pursue the grant if we only install the meters if we receive the grant, just tell me that, and we will only move forward if we get the grant.
Don't need a motion.
You don't.
You don't need a motion.
If that's the will of the council, just tell me. I won't do it unless you want. I've been very overt in saying, at this point in the budget, we'll move forward either way.
Right.
If you tell me otherwise, we won't. It's as easy as that. I'm not going to fight you on it. I thought what you wanted to do was pursue.
So you
Greenhouse
did like a
gas
motion
emissions.
that says, don't spend more than $12,000 per EV charger, period.
I could withdraw my motion if that was a motion that someone else was going to bring forward.
Well, the seconder has to
Sure.
agree.
I would agree with your withdrawing if you
No,
want to
I
withdraw.
will withdraw my motion.
I will unsecond the motion, whatever I do.
Second the withdrawal.
And I'd like to make a new motion that, how would we say it, Todd?
That we only, that the council, that the town will only move forward with the installation of 2 4-handled EV chargers if we receive the grant, the 80% reimbursement grant we've applied for. And absent that, we won't proceed with this. And that's very fair approach.
You couldn't do it anyway, because you wouldn't have the money.
Just say, yeah, just say just what he said.
What he said.
What he said.
I'll second
Is there a
that.
second?
Second it.
From Councilor Grant? Any
And
more?
and the original was that we were going to move forward one way or the other, the way
Right.
the budget was described to us. And now we won't.
Well, we have to vote.
But that's what the motion is, I mean.
That's
Ready?
Yes, okay.
We can discuss this motion now?
We can discuss this motion, yes.
Okay. I'm opposed to this motion, just so you know, and I think we ought to go with it the original way. We're all wrapped up in, a few $1,000s here and there because of the council's goal on the budget, but we have about 25 other goals that are listed that are equal to that, and this is one of them. So I say we leave it the way it is and go with it whether we get it or not. And this is the appropriate place for the money to come from. So,
Right.
anyway, that's how I
Right,
feel.
I concur with Councilor Ford.
I do as well.
So the only reason I would say that is that we've already said that this tax stabilization coming out of the fund is already balancing everything out, and I'm not sure it's worth even talking about any of the other issues in here, because we are getting to the very small amounts. I mean, my next one would be 5,000. I mean, we could talk about this all night and leave an awful lot of people here, talking about things that really, in the whole scope of things at this point, I think are.
Any more discussion?
What are we voting on?
Okay, so we'll do a roll call vote.
Did-
I'm sorry?
Did he make an
The
amendment?
No.
He was just
the-
commenting, it's
the
just
motion
discussion.
was-
That-
Todd
Yeah.
voiced it.
Right, that we only move forward, the motion is to only move forward if we get the grant.
Right. All right, so would you like, roll call vote?
Darrell Ford, nay.
Eric Lund, nay.
Wayne Burton, nay.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Sonia Dell, nay.
James Bubar, aye.
Heather Grant, nay.
Emma Friedrichs, nay.
Okay, so the motion fails, 1, 2, 3,
Yes.
4, 6 to
Yeah.
2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other motions to amend the budget as,
I would like to make a motion to amend the budget, which is very purely symbolic, but it didn't quite resonate right with me, which is that I saw that the budget includes an Amazon Prime subscription. And at the same time, I know that last week we passed a resolution to support local businesses and shop locally. And I think we are very fortunate that while downtown Durham's offerings are limited, We do have a great number of office supplies because of the Barnes and Nobles at UNH and because of what's available at Rite Aid. And I think that it encourages the town to also purchase locally if we don't have shipping already paid for through Amazon Prime. I understand why it might make sense sometimes to still order things online, and I'm fine with that. But I think sometimes having a Prime membership, it becomes so convenient, and with shipping already included, that that you end up doing that instead of purchasing locally. So I'd like to put forth a motion to remove the Amazon Prime subscription.
Is that from a particular department, or is that a town-wide subscription, a town?
It's a townwide.
Townwide.
Yeah, it's a town, and so it's a townwide subscription. In terms of background, our different departments order various supplies and materials from various providers, and we've looked at that as an efficiency effort over the last 2 years. And in talking with Amazon, we found that if all the operations utilized Amazon Prime, we'd see a larger discount, and we'd accumulate. It's some like, is it points you get, or there's some?
I'm not sure with the Amazon.
So it's a discounted price. It's a
price.
discounted price. And so it's taken us a year now to get this up and running, and we believe it will add to efficiency and reduce costs, which again is a goal of the town. Frankly, we don't have the reservoir of suppliers in Durham to meet the needs of the different departments, and I really don't want our administrative assistants having to go to Rite Aid or go up to the UNH bookstore or try to find supplies in downtown Durham. All that is done remotely, on websites, and there are other providers too that are wholesalers that provide good discounted pricing. We just found Amazon. It's very reliable. The pricing was, we thought, more competitive when we looked at this, and there's an ease of usage as well. So that's the reason that we've done it.
Yeah,
That's the reason I got it.
I can't, I wouldn't be able to support that if we put that forward. I've tried to do local.
Does anybody wish to second the motion?
Second it?
Second the motion yet?
No.
Anyone? I mean, you can second it just to support the discussion. You don't have to, it doesn't declare your choice necessarily. Any second? No second. Thank you, Councillor Friedrichs. There's no second to your change. Anything else anyone would like to recommend, or changes you'd like to see made?
I move the question.
Okay. All those in favor of moving the question?
good.
I think we can do this procedurally. We won't necessarily.
Well, no, Councillor
even
Friedrichs
that's
is on
true, we
Zoom.
can't. Okay, so if you would like to see the question called
Yeah. End discussion.
and discussion, then it's a roll call vote. And we'll start over on this side with Councillor Ford.
Aye. Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
We're voting on the budget as
No,
No,
we're voting to end debate.
discussion.
aye. Wayne Burton.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Signed Adele, aye.
James Spoobar, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
All right. So now,
Friedrichs, aye.
okay,
She just
and
said.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
She just said aye.
Aye, okay. So in that case, it's time to call the question. We'll do a roll call vote. Let us know if you're in favor or opposed to the motion that we adopt Resolution 2024 approving FY 2025 operating capital and special fund budgets and the 2025 to 2034 capital improvement plan with amendments.
I second that.
Second from Councillor Grant. So Councillor Grant, do you want to start our roll call vote?
Heather Grant, aye.
James Spoobar, aye.
Signed Adele, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
M. Friedrichs, nay.
Okay.
Okay, so that passes, 7 in favor and 1 opposed.
And I don't know if it was and this doesn't impact the vote that just happened, but when we vote nay on a budget, the budget goes back to the one originally submitted. So any changes we made would disappear, just an FYI.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Okay.
apply this time
Doesn't
because the motion to adopt the amended budget passed.
It passed, yes.
Unless the secondary budget reduced it even further, and that was approved before the end of the year.
You've been reading up on something?
No, it's just, if we don't approve a budget before the end of the year, what was submitted is approved.
Right, automatically,
Right, by
Automatically
automatically,
until
right.
the end of the year, but since we already did it, it's a done deal.
It's a done deal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Gail.
Thank you, Gail. All right. So we have more work to do. We have ordinance 2024-09, amending Chapter 175 zoning, Article 2 definitions, Article 7.1 use and dimensional standards, Article 18 personal wireless service facilities overlay district, Article 19 conservation subdivisions, and the zoning map, and adding a new Article 18.1 attainable housing overlay district. And in our packets, we received updated versions of the ordinance changes. And we have with us Town Planner Michael Barrett and Chair of the Planning Board Paul Rasmussen. So anything that you would like to present?
Well, Madam Chair, at the last meeting when you discussed this, you invited John Randolph to join you tonight in case you had questions for him. So he and Maggie Randolph are here in case you want to ask them questions or have them join the discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here.
So just a quick introduction. So at the council had a public hearing. You closed the public hearing. There had been a number of items that were talked about potentially changing from the planning board's version. All of those were very minor, except there was one change that I had suggested. The town attorney advised that that would be significant in terms of allowing flexibility in the table of dimensions. But there were a handful of others. They were all very minor. And so I just compiled this in a final form for you that is the same as what was presented for a public hearing, except incorporating items, only some non-substantive corrections. It is the same as the ordinance the planning board sent to you, except for minor changes that you are allowed to make, nothing significant at all. And there's the updated map that you have seen, and hopefully everything that you had talked about is in here now, and it might be ready to go.
Mr. Barrett, could you elaborate a little bit more on these dimensional standards of modifying a dimensional provision in the table of dimensions? When you said it's a significant change, what are you talking about? Height, front yard setback, side yard?
Yeah, there was one particular change that I had brought up with the council, and this is after the planning board submitted their draft, thinking that with a attainable housing project, it could be significant, there's lots of elements to it, and while this ordinance includes a lot of its own dimensional standards tailored for the ordinance, there could be other things that might come up from the dimensional table. So I had suggested including kind of a catch-all allowance for flexibility that the planning board could alter any of them by conditional use. There wasn't really anything in particular that I had in mind. One thing that had come up is if for one of the properties that we've talked about, the large property, if the current owner of that wanted to have his own lot, and there was an issue with frontage, that might allow some flexibility, but there's other ways to deal with that.
Paul, did you want to add something? No? Okay.
Madam Chair?
Questions, Councilor Burton?
I got to ask you the question, is everything in here permitted by state law?
Yes?
If the state law...
Nothing that's counter to state law.
If,
I would be very surprised if somebody pointed to something.
you would? You've been in New Hampshire a while. What if the legislature changes the law to be less restrictive than ours? Then are we grandfathered, or does that law override the town's ordinance?
Well, this law is, it's kind of, it's unique. There's not a lot of state law that really speaks specifically to what Durham is doing here.
You mean overlay
There's
districts?
language about workforce housing, but this is something a little bit different from that. We're dealing with workforce housing separately. We may do more in the future, but this is something different. But it has been well vetted by New Hampshire Housing Finance, Ryan Pope, who's very experienced housing navigator in Dover, Nick Taylor and Taylor Cray, the Workforce Housing Coalition. So there's, between the general power to enact zoning and innovative land uses and a general strong support for communities supporting housing, I'm totally confident that this is consistent with state law. For the state to enact a new statute that would put this in violation, I can't imagine what that might be.
Madam Chair, I did note that our attorney recommended not using affordable housing, right?
Workforce housing.
No, she changed it to attainable housing. Is that correct?
Well, she suggested not using workforce housing, so I was debating affordable or attainable, but I think attainable is better because it's more of a general term. Workforce and affordable tend to be
Is that what's
very
in the
specific.
ordinance?
Yes, so it's
Okay.
titled Attainable Housing Overlay District.
Okay.
AHOD. AHOD.
I'll bet you
Whatever.
a quarter that won't matter if the state passes the law, but anyway.
Well, we have the state passes laws all the time. A good correction of that is the fact that they've required us to add the density requirement for workforce housing to be the same as senior housing. And at some point, we had to implement that change through a zoning changes. I mean, we've had those in the past, and we probably would have them in the future, but it doesn't stop you from creating something now.
Right.
I just wanted to
Yes.
bring
I
that
just
to
got a couple of questions on clarification. In the zoning districts under maximum permitted building height in feet, the proposed ordinance says NA and C the AHOD ordinance. So what does that mean?
We're putting a story limit on the buildings as opposed to a raw height limit.
And is that 3-story with a variation for 4 stories? And another variation for 5 stories? Is that what I read in this ordinance?
It's 3 stories, but then if you, there's no maximum number of feet, it's 3 stories, but if it is set back at least 100 feet from any property line, you can go to 4 stories.
I will just share, because I grew up in Exeter.
Wait, excuse me, could I just follow up on that? Just in number, okay. Sorry, so the 4
yeah.
stories is in J4, is that
Right.
where?
Okay, there it is.
And
Just,
could I
yeah, just
go sit
finish
up?
up
Thank
that.
you.
Okay.
In design Q number 2, it says all residential buildings must form a pedestrian-oriented ensemble. What does that mean?
Yeah, good question. That generally, at least in terms of urban planning, where you have more than one building, good design is generally where you're creating a pleasant space. It's the space formed by the buildings. So where you have more than one building, 2, 3, or 4, It's preferred that they work together as an ensemble to create a sense of space. The perfect space, for illustration, is a quadrangle at a university campus, where you create a wonderful sense of space. And UNH has a lot of great spaces. Or you have 3 buildings. So you're creating a sense of space, so people using that, it's just a pleasing feeling, that a sense of enclosure and location, as opposed to buildings being placed sort of oddly and not in relation to one another.
And also presumably you wish to avoid creating parking craters like the Mill Road Plaza.
Right.
And I think also the density plan also avoids fragmentation, so you don't end up, using your 40%. This is a slightly different topic, but maybe related, to how you use the space. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Hopefully consolidated.
Okay. We had some concerns raised in public comment. Questions about requiring recording of, knowing that into the future that the standards that are being used for these units are continue in perpetuity in terms of how they relate to HUD values, et cetera. And I guess concern that there won't be a way to know that that's actually happening.
I think that's included in N.
N,
And
okay.
that was what Robin was referring to. The town of Durham or their agents may require periodic reporting and audits at its option. And she thought may should be replaced with shall, but
Yes.
it's immaterial because Durham still can require it at their option. So,
So if we
word
have,
is
so you say,
immaterial.
so if we have concerns, then
yeah, then they can
we have
still
the
do it.
option.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the difference between may and shall is that if it's shall, then
Is
we
a-
have to
it's a
require it.
Right.
May is still at our discretion.
But I thought there wasn't an income limit,
There is,
an income test.
There's a rental average goal threshold that is to be maintained.
Right. So some properties, the rents may go up to balance that out. Somebody else's rent needs to go down after
Yes.
moving forward. Okay. So,
that's the rental cost, but there's no income involved at all. I mean, it's rent to whoever wants to rent it. Yeah.
The other question that came up was one around a feasibility study. If I can ask the Randolphs, what kind of, clearly this is a huge investment on your part. Do you do some sort of feasibility study yourselves before you get involved? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John Randolph. Feasibility, the quickest feasibility study I can tell you is I got a 200-person waiting list for the 44 units in Dover. So feasibility, right now, the overwhelming numbers are pretty straightforward. I mean, we haven't gone out and done a survey per se, but the demand is so overwhelming. Like I said, we have a 200-person wait list for our units right now.
Okay. And I think that she may have also been asking about a town's feasibility, but, yeah.
Right, so the Randolphs came in after Robin spoke,
Yeah.
so they didn't hear her comments and the types of feasibility studies she was asking for.
Right.
So you might want to clarify that. For
Actually, do you want to just go ahead, Paul?
Well, I wasn't taking notes while she was.
Neither was I.
Is she referring to the feasibility of making the project work financially? Is basic, because that's one of
That
the...
wasn't,
Yeah.
no, it was the.
Impacts, I think, on the.
It was the impact on the
impact.
town. The feasibility, whether it's feasible for the town to consider going forward with this with regards to our overall net gains and net losses.
And that's not a study we
Which
would
a
as-
lot of this,
yeah.
the reason we're doing this is, a lot of it is for intangibles, which any sort of feasibility study would be missing.
And I didn't expect you to answer the town's question. It was really just out of curiosity, how do you approach?
Well, the number one that we got feedback on was the schools, so we spent considerable time
making sure that the number of kids that would come to the project would actually not, harm the school district. We got strong reassurances from the last superintendent of schools that it wouldn't do that. We haven't sat down and talked to the police and fire, but that is part of the planning process. If we bring a project to the town, we'll have to go through all of them, and they'll have to say, well, this is the impact of that. So we have not sat down with police and fire. We have had extensive conversations with the schools, though.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to speak also? Oh, no, okay. Yes, Councilor Freeman.
Yes. Excuse me. On page 11, the housing guarantees. You say you'll take a Section 8 resident whose rent is guaranteed by the U.S. government, but you won't take somebody else whose guarantee is by their parent or by their friend or by some other associate?
Well,
I don't understand why you wouldn't take a third-party guarantee.
One of the major concerns that we heard during last January's public hearings was we're just creating housing for students, cheap housing for students. And so our effort to try to counteract that claim is to basically, you need to be, we want the name on the list to be the person staying there. And we want to basically ensure that they are getting their money independently. So yes, we'll take the government money, we'll take housing authority money, but a guarantee from your buddy or a guarantee from your parents is, we chose to disallow that for those reasons.
And the units can't be sublet.
And the units can't be sublet. Well, they can be sublet with the same
restrictions as the
same
original
restrictions.
lease.
So is the concept someone can graduate from college here, but if they don't have enough financial statement to support a lease, you would not let somebody else co-sign that rent? They're not a student anymore. I mean, it seems you're very anti-student, which I'm not thrilled about anyways, but on top of that, you're saying even when they're not a student, you won't take their guarantee, you won't take a third-party guarantee. They're trying to get a job, they're trying to get this attainable housing, they want to work in Durham. But the landlord looks at their credit and says, you don't have any credit, you've never rented before on your own. So they say, well, I'll get you a guarantor. And this says, no, that won't work. You can't.
Well, the planning board did spend some time wrestling with this, and as Paul said, it was considered a very good strategy for preventing this from turning into a student housing development. As evidently many undergraduate students have since they don't have income, their parents co-sign for them. So by not allowing that, that would prevent it becoming overrun by undergraduate students. But I wonder if we could ask maybe John Randolph, because they've dealt with this a lot in places where they've rented, and I'm sure they've had people that have been graduate students and recent graduates, and I would assume if you're a recent graduate without a lot of credit, if you do have promise of a job, in many cases that would be sufficient, but.
Yeah.
Actually, this works really well with the brilliance of what you've written here. Our current project requires that we can't go above 60. So that means that I can't charge someone 62 and somebody else 58% to offset that. The thing that you've written into this policy that I think works really well is, what you're looking for is if someone can't afford 60%, that allows the project to drop that rate down and compensate that on the other end of things. I'll be honest with you, there's very few landlords out there right now that are accepting third-party signatures into normal workforce housing situations anyways. If someone can't, come in 30 to 33% of their pay to get into housing and everything, working with parents is actually typically very much a nightmare and stuff. So we've had a few sign in the past right out of high school and they almost never work out, so we've stayed typically away from them. So the one thing about the project that I feel strongly about is you've allowed it so that someone, if they only can afford, a 40% AMI, they can still be part of the project, and that could be offset by somebody else that could pay a little bit of a higher number. So instead of looking for third-party signatures on this sort of thing, you're actually looking to make it match their income a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So you are checking income?
You're checking income for rentals anyways, so you have to get some sort of income verification for a rental anyways.
Part of a standard credit check.
Just a standard credit background check, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm curious, I was a financial aid officer at UNH, and we did large packages for students. Would a package of financial aid that include housing qualify them to rent a place if they could produce that?
I know this is an extremely sensitive topic, so I'm going to kind of speak from my heart and soul here. We have UNH students that work at Harmony Homes. They're UNH nursing students, they're junior and senior year. I was a military veteran when I finished my undergrad, and I had already served in the military. I think, personally, I think what we were looking to do with this is that we didn't want to turn it into a keg party and not have it service the purpose of, supporting workforce in the area. Michael and I have had a lot of philosophical discussions and everything else. If a student is going here and can qualify to pay to be here and is earning it and everything else, then that's probably them being part of our community. Like I said, I have nursing students that are working 20 or 25 hours a week for me and could probably afford to live in some of our housing, choose to live on campus because they want to be near friends. I personally think that the students aren't going to feel, I wouldn't say welcomed, I just don't think it's going to be a community that they would naturally migrate towards. But there might be some older students that are grad school, that are working part-time, that it makes sense. I don't think that should exclude somebody that's in a different circumstance. I understand the goal is to keep it from becoming, a third UNH students out there and everything else. I think that's the goal of the municipality as a whole, though. Did I answer the question, or did I?
No, I appreciate that.
It becomes more of a question of who are we trying to attract into these units. And I mean, I work with a good number of students who work a part-time job, 20, 30 hours a week, and go to school full-time, right? And those folks are working 20, 30 hours a week so they can cover their rent and food and stuff, because they don't have their parents ready to pay the rent for them. Those types of students would be welcome here, right? That's who we're building these things for, is folks like that, to get them out of the really high-priced student dorm mills, as well as other people who are working 20, 30, 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, whatever it takes to make ends meet, right? I think focusing on where a voucher, where a guarantee comes from, I mean, it's more, that's there more to keep it from becoming a dorm party.
Right. So the opposition is not to students per se, it's students who are here on their parents' dime. And
I'm not sure it's even that, though. I mean, when you think about the fact that we have to continue to discuss the fact that we have created a lot of student housing, and we haven't created a lot of 30-somethings or, for other people that want to come into the community, and not maybe even into the community, but are looking for housing and apartments,
Right.
because it's difficult in every town, right? We have a housing problem in New Hampshire, and in this town specifically, we have a pretty big gap in sort of the age graphs, and we were trying to also build for this sort of missing community that we need in our town, people that will also help support our downtown and create, a little bit more mix within our community. And when you start to try and have a strategy, we had a strategy of building all the student housing. We have nice big single-family homes, and we were missing something there that's also for a part of the community that we could build more of in the town of Durham.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
in a nutshell, and I think we're focusing too much on the student
Right,
component based on the fact that they're finding ways to find housing. And we have a lot of other people in our communities that aren't.
Right, right. For instance, graduate students are
They're
a
struggling.
completely different population from undergraduate students. I mean, I was one myself many years ago, and I work with several people at UNH who are in that category. And graduate students are competing for workforce housing. They're not, most of them are not interested in living with undergraduates.
It did appear that the university in their master plan, which may be a space shot that you would recognize, is talking about bringing back graduate housing.
Yes, yes, and they absolutely should. And that should not forestall any efforts on the part of the town to provide housing that would be suitable for graduate students.
Does the no more than 3 rule apply to a development like this? No more than 3 unrelated?
Would not apply in this overlay district. There explicitly says that does not apply.
So you could have 4, 5, or 6?
Subject to any other requirements there are, fire code, et cetera.
Yeah.
But, I was going to say, 1 and 2 bedrooms probably don't.
I was going to say, the building codes as well as the fire codes also have occupancy limits that go along with the square footage, so we can't go crazy.
Yes.
On your density and I want to make sure I understand it completely. You take out is the wetlands discussion taking out the wetlands does not apply to the density calculation in any of the other zones? Do you take out the wetlands when you're doing this calculation?
Yeah, the standard for our zoning ordinance is that for any parcel to calculate the density, X number of square feet per dwelling unit, you take out 3 things. You take out wetlands, you take out open water, which is really wetlands, and then there's a third thing that you take out. If you have a wetland, and whatever the wetland overlay district is, whether it's 75 feet or 100 feet, within that wetland buffer, you also take out any soils that are poorly drained, very poorly drained, or somewhat poorly drained, which frankly I've heard from a number of people is a real pain. At any rate, maybe we'll revisit that. I think the Conservation Commission may be looking at that with their wetland shoreline overlay district. I'm not sure offhand. But in this one, we did not. So we included wetlands and open water, but not the poorly drained soils.
So that is consistent across all of the other residential zones? then?
Yeah, everywhere else except in this overlay district for any density, you take out those 3 things: wetlands, open water, and poorly drained soils within the wetland buffer. But here, it's just wetlands and open water.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I was struck by the facts that you published, where you essentially said that the town planner, the town administrator, and other town officials determine or unequivocally state we've done our fair share. And
That's for workforce housing,
Yeah.
to meet the state requirement.
yeah, and that's what drove a lot of this in the beginning. And I guess I'm just trying to understand what's our moral obligation compared minus the fair share. So how many houses are we, dwelling units, excuse me, are we talking about building?
So I appreciate that comment, and very frankly, there is, as you know, there is a state law that mandates that every community provide its fair share of workforce housing, and there's some details in how that is delineated. And very frankly, in my professional opinion, I think we meet it. And I've had conversations with Todd, and Todd stated to me he also believes we meet it. Others have stated that. Now, you know, if we were challenged in court, I'm confident we'd win, but you never know. And much of that's because we've created thousands of beds of student housing. So I believe legally that Durham complies with that. So in my view, this is not that the town of Durham is being compelled legally to do this, that there's a sword over us. I don't feel that.
There's no penalty, is there?
Pardon?
Well, if we don't do anything, what's the penalty?
There is none right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Sally Tobias, the chair of the Housing Task Force, put together a very good housing PowerPoint, which she's shown to a lot of people in town. Some of you may have seen it. And she includes a number of reasons why we should be trying to create more attainable housing. We're part of a larger community. We use all of the people, the workers, at, you know, even if they're not in town, at Target and our firefighters and everything. That there are many people in town feel there's a moral obligation. Not everybody, but many feel that way. And also, Durham is very difficult to find a place. A lot of people, they wish their children could find a place, even just a rental, affordable rental in town. People who are house rich, that have a 4-bedroom house, but they're living there by themselves, would like to stay in Durham. They don't want to go to Riverwoods, and they don't feel they have many options. And then another reason is many people feel that diversity is a very healthy thing in a town. And Durham has particular kinds of housing. We got lots of student housing. We have lots of wonderful single-family houses that are now very expensive. We have a lot of senior housing, both subsidized and not subsidized. But if you are somebody who can't afford a house, you don't want to go into student housing, and you're not a senior, which is everyone in the middle from 21 to 60, maybe, you don't have a lot of, and you don't have a lot of money, there's not a lot of choices. So part of this is a sense that Durham will be a richer community if we grow some, and if there's opportunities for people, for more kinds of people to find housing here.
I didn't hear how many units we're going to build under this ordinance.
So that would depend on how many pieces of property eventually get developed.
But, okay.
Yeah, the Randolphs we're talking is, and they can correct me if I'm wrong with this, about eventually building 200 units on the parcel. It's the Keefe property.
Well, you can get about 10 dwelling units per acre, as I read the ordinance.
Oh, with the, under the attainable housing ordinance?
Yes, the 4,200 square feet per dwelling unit.
Right, you could, it's, the density is quite generous. If you don't have, apart from wetlands and open water.
And then the recent change to where you only need 1.5 parking spots per dwelling unit.
Yeah, or 1 parking space.
And you go 3 stories, you got a lot of room in an acre.
Yeah, the density is generous, but as a practical matter, you know, even on the largest property, I have a list of all the lots in the overlay district, and the Keefe property is the largest, 117 acres. Even on that, there is a limit of 200 in the ordinance. That's the largest lot. I think that's the largest available buildable lot in all of Durham. But
200 per...
200 total for a project. For any one project.
For a project,
Yeah.
but not for the ordinance.
No, 200 for any
So there
project.
could be 2 or
And
3
the only
projects
site
there.
that could accommodate, you know, anywhere near that is the Keefe property. After the Keefe property, the largest lot is, there's a 48-acre lot that has a single family on it. At Technology Drive, you know, 121 Technology Drive is a very large parcel, 143 acres, but that's in an industrial use. There's a few other lots with, 12 acres, 8 acres, 30 acres, but it's limited. But anyway, to answer your question, even though the density would allow up to 200 for that lot, with having to preserve 60% open space, having to have all your parking, your building, your drainage, it limits how many units you can get on a lot.
60% open space is included in the 4,200.
Right, but in terms of fitting that number of dwelling units on your space, on your lot, you're taking 60% off immediately, and then you have to accommodate your building, your parking, your utilities, etc. So the next biggest vacant lot after the Keefe property is, there's one, as I say, with 49 acres that's in single-family use. There's a single-family lot with 32 acres they could develop, a vacant 26-acre lot. There's not a lot of, there's only a handful of larger developable lots in the whole overlay district. And it's difficult to do these projects, so, I don't think, I have not heard from any developers. I mean, usually when a community, we're looking for a sweet spot. We don't want it to be so difficult that nobody's doing it, but we don't want it to be so inviting that they're knocking down the doors to do high-density projects. I'm hoping there's going to be a sweet spot with one, maybe two, maybe three, maybe more, smallish, medium projects.
Yeah, and related to this is the word we have from Torrington Properties concerning the Mill Road Plaza. They say they have no interest in putting student housing on the site, and they have determined that any other kind of housing doesn't pencil out there.
Right.
Councilor Freeman.
The 200 units that you talk about is the maximum. In two other places in the ordinance, though, it says it can be more than 200 units. So you have language in it, it seems like it's completely contradictory. One says maximum units is 200, and that's in J2. And another further in the ordinance, there's two spots. In T for incentives, on page 13, it says that the board may negotiate to allow for additional density, and the maximum increase in density would be another 20%. Then you could raise 200. So
they
isn't
could
a maximum of 200.
They could exceed the 200, as you say, in two places, both by conditional use.
So they're in conflict. One says 200 and the other says more than 200.
Yeah, but that's not in conflict. One
It's
is
not an
two,
absolute 200.
one is 200 and,
No.
if you do these things,
Darrell, Councilor Ford is correct.
then you can get more.
200's the max, but if you have a smaller property and you could only fit 50, but you came to us and said, I've got this idea, I'll give you 70% open space, let me put 70 people here. Let me, or
70 units.
70
But
units
the ordinance
instead of
says you
50.
could raise it above 200.
Or 60 units instead of 50, then, that's the kind of incentive we're talking about. But 200 still ends up being the overall cap.
No, it isn't.
No, I think that says
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
It says
But
the
it's still only
maximum increase in
240.
density allowed
240?
under this is 20%, which could raise the threshold of over 200
Oh, okay.
units, which
Yeah.
I think is arbitrary anyways.
That's right.
So in your three big parcels, one at 48 acres, one at 100 acres, and one at 148 acres,
No, not 148.
117.
117 is the biggest. Oh, no, but that's,
I believe
that's
you
what-
mentioned,
that's the old
Tech
Goss
Center.
building, right.
right, so there's three different parcels, one's 3 times as big as the first, and they all can only do 200 according to this ordinance. It just seems arbitrary, not related to the site.
I agree.
And then you're saying, and if you've got 148 acres, you don't even want them to carve off 50 acres that they could use for something else because it might be in contradiction to your getting around doing only
Say that
200.
again, what are you saying about the 121 Technology Drive?
It's the biggest one, 148 acres.
Oh, but the amount
And you're
of...
saying all they can do is 200 units on 148 acres.
Oh, no, but that 140, that includes their building and their parking lot. If they wanted to do a project there, they would have to cut out a separate vacant lot from that. And I don't know how big, it might be 50, 60 acres there. That's just the gross lot size. But you're right, I mean, they could exceed 200 either by the conditional use or by the incentive, but that's, you know, for that to happen, again, they'd have to meet all the other requirements, the amount of open space, show all their parking, it'd have to be a harmonious design. You know, it'd be a hurdle.
Yes.
I just want to note in P, it speaks to this issue of open space and says a minimum of 60% of the gross acreage of the parcel shall be set aside as permanent open space. And I believe that requirement, while the planning board has felt it's workable, will have the impact of keeping these kinds of projects smaller than they would otherwise be. So I think that's sort of a natural damper on the density we might experience.
I was one of the people who didn't want to put a cap
Yeah.
on these properties because, I mean, I think that if you, it does mean that when you get a piece of property like the Keefe property, that you can't take full advantage of potentially what you could do there, and you end up potentially missing out on you know, if we're, something like that, we're talking about a new neighborhood. So now we're saying, well, we're going to constrain the size of the neighborhood and not get quite as much housing as we really want. But the consensus was to leave a cap in place.
But they can get around that though, Paul. I mean, somebody buys the property, they split it into 2 lots and they do 2 projects.
No, well, it says specifically that you can't get around it by subdividing or phasing. So
Can't get around what?
you can't get around the 200 limit. So if somebody bought the Keefe property and cut it in half, you know, we would monitor that, or we would probably, as part of a subdivision, put a note, you know, beware.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, so we would.
But
we would-
why would you do that?
Why?
Well, I mean, because the idea is that with the parcels that we have available now, the biggest one being 117 acres, that the concern about a huge influx of people into town and regulating that by having a cap on it. It's a very generous density. I mean, at 117 acres, you know, times 10, well, that could be a lot of units. So I think there was a sense that, you know, people are concerned about impacts on the schools, other fiscal impacts, environmental impacts. The density's generous, set a cap, but then you could also exceed it for good cause, by conditional use, or if there's other incentives. But the planning board, you know, if somebody had, say, a 117-acre parcel, and they were showing, gee, we could get 250 units on here easily, keep all of our open space, we want to do all these other nice things. We have all these other plans. We want to connect with the path, with the downtown. We're going to connect with the other road. It's going to be open to the public. We're going to have agricultural lands. And we could really have 250 units here, and we're showing you how well we can do that. They could do that by conditional use, you know, if they meet the criteria and persuade the board.
The ordinance says it's limited to 20%, so in your example, it would be 240 units.
Oh, but the conditional use, I don't think there's a limit on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was looking under incentives and not.
Right. So there's 2 ways.
Incentives
The limit is, the incentives is a 20%, but then the conditional use, theoretically, you know, there's not a limit other than the underlying density.
The cap you mentioned is per project. It's not per the ordinance.
Yes.
Right.
So if you had 10 projects, you could have 10 times X.
Good.
So there really isn't a cap.
No, it says under J2, the maximum of 200 applies to any individual lot or tract.
Yes,
proposed
but
for
we have
project.
multiple lots and tracts, and so the point is, you could get a lot more than 200 in the town of Durham.
Yeah, it's
Right.
not going to happen.
You mean, Or, no, for
If
example,
it's
there's...
not going to happen, then why don't we limit the total?
Why?
Because I haven't seen any financial impact statements. I've asked for it from the very beginning of the Housing Task Force, and none is forthcoming.
That normally takes place during the approval process, all those kinds of questions.
Well,
Is it not also that a developer needs to know that they can do enough developing to make it financially viable for them? If they're limited
Right.
into how much, really limited in their building, the 200 seems like, I'm assuming, a reasonable number that a developer could make a profit, not find themselves underwater because they are limited in what they can do on that.
If there's all of a sudden a giant stampede and all of these parcels are being developed, we'll come back and meet again and we'll change the
Yeah.
zoning ordinance.
I've seen the process, it doesn't work that fast.
I don't think we're going to be
Doesn't look that fast to
overrun.
approve.
And especially if there's an application in the pipeline, it goes through the old ordinances, it's not any new proposal.
I know.
So,
But there's just not very many large parcels, and as Paul says, I think Paul said it, the 60%, or maybe it was Todd, excuse me, the 60% can be a real constraint. So I don't think you're going to see a development on a 6-acre lot, because between taking aside 60% of that, and then all of the upfront expense of managing an attainable housing project with the calculations you have to do, I just don't see a developer doing it for a small lot.
Right, for a 6-acre lot, you'd be looking at 20 to 25 units. I
You could
don't
do
think
like a
that-
cottage
wouldn't be
cluster
the
or
maximum.
something, yeah.
if you do 3-story, 1,200 square foot units, you could easily get 60 on a 6-acre lot with parking.
Not easily.
I'm referring
Well,
to
you get
what you
engineering.
pointed out earlier, that the 4,200 square feet per dwelling unit requirement, which
That
is about
includes
10 per
the
acre.
open space.
So can we have an orderly discussion, Madam Chair?
I thought we
Can we
were.
have a
Yeah.
look?
Under the rules, we have, a person is recognized to speak until they finish, and then someone else gets recognized to speak until they're finished, unless you declare an open discussion. It's a little easier to follow that way, that's all I'm saying.
And I've just been watching to see if anyone else wants to offer anything, so. That's why I haven't been doing
I have a
doing it that
question.
way. You,
Madam Chair, can I be
Yes.
recognized?
I don't want to, yeah, that's fine.
What are we going to do with the piece of the Keefe property that's in Barrington or Dover, wherever it
Or
is?
Madbury.
Madbury, and I'm wondering, because that's a terrible place to, I've tried to get out of Dan's driveway on my own now. And then you've got the driveway coming in across the street from the sewage treatment plant. You're on a curve. You've got the speeders coming down eastbound on Route 4. They have a cruiser out there now most every morning because people are zooming by. Is there an exit we could put off the back?
That's part of the design. I don't think that
Right.
remains to our discussion.
Okay, I withdraw that. I withdraw the question.
The zoning map suggests that there's a continuation of Baghdad Road to the east of Route 108, and that presumably would be a second access to this development.
Possibility. And we did meet with DOT about a potential project on the Keefe site, and they were receptive. There might be some kind of deceleration lane that would be required.
I'm sure there was.
But that's,
I have a follow-up question, if I may, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
and then we're going to let Town Administrator Selig speak.
Can the owner of the property be assured that he has the frontage before he sells it to build his own house?
Well,
is that really,
That's,
I just don't,
is that a part of this ordinance is the question?
no, that's
Is
not
it-
part of the ordinance.
No.
Yeah.
That's
Because right now,
that's a one-on-one.
right now,
dialogue.
there's no frontage for,
well, I can give a quick answer.
Quick answer.
Yeah, I think that, let's say hypothetically, if the owner of that property on wanted to have his own lot carved out further up, say on, Johnson Creek, that would require a developer to put, I think it'd be a private road, not a town road. Be a private road, would have to have a right-of-way, and it would have to have 300 feet of frontage on a lot. So that would just mean a developer would have to, finagle a little bit, but it's certainly doable.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Town administrator.
Well, I just,
Whoever you are.
Councilor Ford is exactly right in terms of access. That would all be addressed during the planning board review process. I would just note that the Department of Transportation for the state would have to review any such application, and there will very likely be significant cost implications to making, if it's a designated turn lane or developing the old Class 6 road. Those are expensive endeavors, so the developer needs enough density to overcome those additional costs. So we shouldn't think of density in a vacuum. There are costs associated with getting the development to play out.
And plus extending water and sewer across Route 4.
I just point out that it took Portsmouth 6 months to get a cut permit just to put that construction road up the side of Wagon Hill Farm.
Which would need to take place anywhere, right? So, any other questions, discussion? Yes?
The ordinance in front of us, the fifth whereas, there's some language talked about that it's easier to do this rental than for sale. And was there any study that went behind this statement? It would seem to me that this is an opinion and not, I haven't seen anything that would indicate that.
Well, that's my opinion, but I've given this a lot of thought and been around the planning board and the workforce housing ordinance, in the Workforce Housing Coalition a lot. But one of the challenges of doing affordable housing that's for sale is that whether it's on a single family lot or it's a condominium, is one key element is keeping it affordable. And so, say, more typically, it's, say, a single-family house, and if it meets the state's workforce housing definition, then it's going to have a maximum sales price of, I just have last year's number was $407,000. It's a little higher now. But so you have to regulate the price that they sell, but then to monitor that owner when they sell it in the future, you have to have a deed restriction, and the town has no control. There's got, I suppose we oversee the deed restriction somehow, but in perpetuity for all those subsequent sales, I suppose you could do it at the rate of inflation. So monitoring and enforcing those private sales in the future is complicated, and the density that you can get with a multifamily arrangement is much higher, and it's easier to organize that and structure it and review it as, one or more multifamily buildings, all for rent, one person owns it, maintains it, reports on it, than subdividing out, 20 single-family houses and then having to oversee the subsequent sales.
Well, first of all, no one's talking about overseeing the sale of homes, single-family homes here. We're talking about, even if it's just a rental standalone, I think I've expressed my opinion before that I thought for sale would be included, and I'm not going to
closer to your mic.
I'm not going to press on for sale housing being included, but including this paragraph that says it's easier to do this than to do that. It's just, I don't understand the necessary whereas they're saying it's easier to do. You have audit rights that you're putting into this ordinance to check on incomes and sales. So you would have audit, what's that?
Not income.
But you have audit rights to make sure that it stays affordable. Would you say that? There's audit rights in here. So there's audit rights that you can put in on a sale as well.
I don't have any objection to removing that.
So I guess I would just say removing that one and removing the eighth whereas. the frequently asked questions. This council has not dug in at all to the frequently asked questions about their
if we just take them-
applicability, the opinions expressed in those frequently asked questions. Are they being included in this audit?
No, I don't have any objection to removing those two.
Okay, I guess I would
If that's acceptable.
recommend removing both the fifth and the eighth whereases in this, and take the
Yeah.
frequently asked questions out of the legal mix of it all.
I agree.
Just let the words say what they say without immediate interpretation.
So I'm wondering, to move this along, would you be open to making a resolution to pass this proposal with the elimination of whereas 5 and
Whereas
whereas 8? And that way
Yes,
we can vote, discuss and vote.
yes. And that was my last question, by the way.
Good job.
So do you want,
Yes.
that's the motion with the addition you need to make, right?
For the benefit of those with the paper in front of them, I'm going to make a motion number 3 on this ordinance, that the Durham Town Council does hereby approve council proposed changes to ordinance 2024-09, amending Chapter 175 zoning, Article 2, definitions, Article 12.1, use and dimensional standards, Article 18, personal wireless service facilities overlay district, Article 19, conservation subdivisions and the zoning map, and adding a new Article 18.1, attainable housing overlay district, and return the document back to the planning board for review.
And
that
with
required?
removal of
But, well,
the whereas.
there's no need to return the document back to the planning board because those, eliminating those two whereases would
Right.
not be a substantive change to what the planning board sent to the
Okay.
council.
So it would take out the last line in that motion number 3 in the council's packet, as well as the word "and" in the second to last line.
I second that.
Okay, and so you don't feel the change, removing the whereas needs to be part of that motion?
Yes.
So just to clarify, the proposed changes are only to the council resolution, which is not actually an ordinance. It's really just a statement. And there are no proposed changes to the actual ordinance. But if there were any substantial changes to the actual legal ordinance, then we would have to go back to the planning board for another public hearing.
Well, Council Friedrichs is correct. I would just clarify that this is an ordinance the council's voting on, and the whereases are part of the ordinance. So I would recommend you formally move to strike whereas 5 and 8, if that is your goal.
Yes, that is,
But
yes.
the motion is also applying to all of these different sections of ordinances, not just the attainable housing,
Right.
Yes, it's the whole thing.
The whole thing.
without any discussion.
And it's part
Wait,
of,
are we voting just on the changes, or are we voting to pass the ordinance?
We're voting to pass the ordinance.
right, my
Yes.
motion was to pass the ordinance with the change eliminating the current 5th whereas and 8th whereas at the beginning of the ordinance.
I second that.
Questions? Any other
Well,
questions? Yes.
For points of discussion, not question, discussion. Are we opening to discussion yet?
Yes. We've had a second,
Yeah.
so we are, yes.
So then I would say that I would be in favor of amending this language, but I am not yet ready to pass the ordinance as is. I have a couple of concerns. I mean, I think that we have come a very far way with this, but there's still some tweaks that would really help it to be in line more with Durham's stated goals. So one, I mean, in looking at in the open space descriptions, and this is something that we heard quite a bit from the public initially, particularly from the Agricultural Commission and Committee, Agricultural Committee, that really protecting valuable agricultural land was a high priority for them. If we were to do a small adjustment to change open space so that it excluded passive recreation, that would be more favorable to agricultural uses, as opposed to putting, say, baseball fields. There also could be possibility of, I'm a little concerned about not having a height limit on the number of stories, just from the experience of Exeter, because Phillips Exeter Academy came forth with their library, 5 stories from the outside. It is in fact the equivalent of 8 stories, though, on the inside. And as a result, they had to buy a new fire truck because it was too tall for their existing apparatus. I also I agree with Councillor Friedman that, I understand Michael's reasoning behind the not having the, units for sale, but I have some concerns that eventually, if this project were to not be financially feasible as a continued rental, I think there should be an option for units to go up for sale. And it doesn't mean having single-family housing. It could be a condo structure. And New Hampshire Housing does have model ordinances for how to express that language. So I do think we have options there for the type of ordinance language that we can adopt. I also think that we should be tying our density bonus to energy standards. And I think that's because Durham has had a very successful higher standard for energy efficiency in our buildings since 2016, a standard which we are not enabled to require currently because of state law, but we can set it as part of our density benefit, such that you receive the density bonus not only if it's workforce housing, but if it's also energy efficient, and that achieves our same goal. So in New Hampshire, utilities are considered a part of the definition of affordable housing. And so any affordable housing really should be looking at, by state law, by our own state law, rental prices plus utilities. And so the energy efficiency part of that is very much already a part of the rental price. And so it just makes sense that it's one of the most cost-effective things that developers can be doing, is paying attention to energy efficiency from the offset. But we've learned from experience that developers may not be looking at that unless they have help in doing so from the town of Durham. And we saw that with our student housing developments, and our landlords association has been very pleased with the result of those requirements, but that was not something that they were going to do on their own without having the energy standards put forth by Durham, by the town of Durham. And so I think this ordinance has moved a long way, but I think that there's some conflict with our other town goals, and some things that could be tweaked further to address the concerns from the public that have been expressed in the earlier hearing.
Just out of curiosity, Michael and Paul, have these items been addressed by the planning board in discussion of this ordinance?
Well, of the 4 items that Councilor Friedrichs mentioned.
Yes.
So under open space, it does provide natural cultural resources, forest management, provide opportunities for agriculture and passive recreation. But I do know that Sally Tobias also gave a presentation to the Parks and Recreation Committee about housing, and they emphasized that they want to see as much possible for recreation opportunities. And it does reference A through G under conservation subdivisions as the guidelines for reviewing open space, and there's a lot there. It's pretty well written. There's good criteria for that. So in terms of the height limit, so there's a 3-story height limit, 4 stories if you're set back 100 feet, but no limit in number of feet, just in stories. For sale issue we talked about, but I also want to add to the for sale issue that's not what this ordinance is. That's dealt with other places. the conservation subdivision has a provision for workforce housing which is really oriented for sale. And there's a bonus, a density bonus for that. So, and if that's not adequate, we should look at that because it has not been used. But I think that's where there's an opportunity for sale. And then finally, in terms of energy, only that under the incentives, it does mention sustainability measures. Doing that could be an incentive for a project. I know that's not what Councilor Friedrichs is referring to regarding energy, but.
Yes.
I had a question for Councilor Friedrichs.
Sure.
Which is that earlier in the process, I too had conveyed through Michael Barrett that the Energy Committee was interested in adding sustainability and energy efficiency as a way to potentially achieve additional density. And in section T, it does talk about that the planning board may negotiate with the applicant to allow for additional density or reduced open space in exchange for the inclusion of various elements that will enhance the quality of the project, including but not limited to, and there's a long list, but one of them is sustainability measures. And so I interpreted that to mean that the planning board had heard that suggestion and had tried to find a way to include it productively. And I'm just wondering why that's insufficient from your perspective.
So from my perspective, I've also just heard a lot of challenges with the planning board with things being too open to interpretation and too non-quantifiable. And so I think that if a density is laid out that, if you're not meeting these energy standards, then your density is X.
Right.
And if you do meet the energy standards, then your density is Y. Then that creates a lot more predictability for developers. They know exactly what they're getting into versus kind of being at the whim of the planning board and not sure what those numbers will look like. And I think that it's the same concern that we've seen around conditional use, or where the language is very descriptive, and that having so much open to interpretation it makes things more challenging for the planning board to make decisions, and it also makes things less attractive to developers because they're just not sure of the risk that they're taking in terms of investing all this time in a project that could not get approved. And I think we have the opportunity, we can't require these energy standards because of this state law anymore in Durham. These energy standards that have worked very well and have proved their worth and their return on the investment over and over again. But we can, not require them, but we can offer them as a carrot. And so I think we should be offering that as a carrot. If you want the density bonus, then you must meet Durham's energy requirements, and that's end of story.
Thank you.
Do we know that carrot is actually legal? Because I think the law that was passed said that a town cannot have energy standards more stringent than the state standards.
A town cannot require them. I agree that this would be a question worth running past our town attorney, but I think that exploring language that is more specific makes sense.
Would that specificity impact this ordinance moving forward? In other words, if sustainability measures are improved or changed in a way that might not be reflected if we were very specific about what those were? Just a question.
I think I would agree. I think leaving it open allows for the dialogue at the time of the project. And I think that's, you want the document, like you said, to be a living document. And the number you might put today might not be right for tomorrow, 10 years from now. I don't know. But we all know that this is a document that's been worked on for a long, long time. And if you're 99% there, instead of trying to go again for perfection, we never get perfection. Things might be modified. Are we going to find other areas where we're going to be wanting to work on workforce housing? I think we know we do. We want some areas that have some single-family clusters. We want other things to develop. This is a very good start of one phase, to me, of some strategies, and I just don't think we should keep, we keep trying to get to perfection, and there isn't going to be perfection. I think this is a very good document.
Yes, Councilor Bubar.
One of the things I'm concerned about, and it strikes to the home ownership, and the RKG study that was done, I guess, commissioned by the Housing Task Force, actually did identify the number of rental units and the number of ownership units. And certainly no offense to any of the people involved, but approval of a project, it goes with the property, not with the developer. And over time, I get concerned about maintenance of rental-only units. Economies get tough. Maintenance can be something that is put on a back burner. And so I'm kind of concerned about quality over the length of time. And what impact that could have on the community. And I just view home ownership as a way that the people living there take a greater sense and pride in their property.
So my big concern is when I look at a project, I want a project to be either all rental or all home ownership. I don't want a mix, which was one of the things that was talked about early on. It's like, well, let's provide a mix so that the for sale stuff can help fund the rest of the project, for example. But that, in my mind, creates an injustice to the project as a whole, in that we're not carving out lots that are being sold. We're selling units within the overall unit in a condominium model. So if I sell 12 units, and there's another 40 units that are owned by the rental agency in a condominium type association, then one side or the other dictates the rules to the for the whole place, and that would lend itself to to abuse in terms of a fairness level down the road. And that's one of the reasons we decided to look at this as trying to just, from a time-constrained issue of trying to get something out just in a year, to focus just on the rentals side of it and write it in that mode. We want to rework the conservation subdivision article in the near future, and the focus of that one will be home ownership. It would be owned lots as opposed to necessarily, or at least would easily lend itself to being subdivided owned lots, as opposed to being primarily a rental type vehicle.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about, I guess, ability to manage. It also, though, seems like if I have home ownership over here and I have rental over here, we may be doing some economic segregation within the community as opposed to having fully integrated neighborhoods.
You can get a lot more
economically integrated neighborhoods.
I mean, how many, you say that you think having a sales component will make it more financially viable, but
home ownership component would make it.
Well, but that allows the developer to get an infusion of a lot of money up front. But then from that point, it's a rental project. So either way, it's a financial calculation for a developer. And the developer has got to know what they're doing. You can sell a lot of units up front, get an infusion of cash, and then it's a rental project, and it's still not work just because And I also think most apartment buildings, Joe, Councilor Friedman, probably could speak to this interesting question, but how many apartment buildings are ultimately converted to condominiums? Some, I think most of them probably remain as rental. And when they're sold, if they're converted to condominiums in 20 years, that might be a nice thing. They're probably going to be less you lose your affordability, you lose your rental units. It's a trade-off. And this cannot be all things. This is not a panacea for energy. It's not a panacea for home ownership. This is focused on what can Durham do to create a good number of relatively affordable units and for rent. And this is the answer to that. But as Paul says, we want to now look at conservation subdivisions, see what we can do to make that more usable for housing and particularly workforce housing.
Yes, my concern, Michael, is 30 years down the road, when these buildings are tired and the Randolphs are retiring, what if there needs to be major investments into this property? What if something happens with water line, a road, something like that? And the type of investments that are required basically can't be done on the restrictions in the affordable rental. So that, it will go into the deed that this property cannot be rented out at higher than X rates.
So
Please let me finish. We now have a tired building that needs significant capital investment, and it just can't be done based on the rental income that's coming in. Now, if that property could be sold off, then it could be sold off at affordable rates, and the new owners would then take on that project of investing in the property, what was needed to bring it up to a livable condition. And it could still be sold off as affordable units. But I think that there needs to be a way that that whoever is managing the property can somehow sell off those units if the model is not working to rent them at those levels.
I have trouble, I think you're grasping at straws. I mean, look at Baghdad Woods, it's been there for how long? And that's got a tighter budget model than what one of these projects is going to end up having. Doesn't it? I mean, that's 40%, 50% subsidized?
Can the Randolphs speak to that?
Yes.
If I may, to address certainly your concerns that you're talking about reinvestment. First of all, if I'm retiring 30 years from now, I'm way over past my date, but I'll probably be living at 555 Briggs Way by then. But 30 years from now or 25 years from now, the project's paid off also. So theoretically, you'd be paying less in your mortgages. You have to plan for capital expenses. I mean, a 60% AMI, I think a concern was brought up earlier. What happens if you guys get 6 or 7 projects? There's not a lot of people building 60% AMI projects. I'm just going to be straightforward with you. You have to get typically some sort of federal or state subsidy to make that aspect of work. But to reassure you that there's always a capital investment plan on water lines, electrical lines, those sort of things, so that's maintained. HUD fair market rate adjusts with the market rates in the area, so that it tends to track with inflation, tends to track with those numbers. So you'll see that number go up over time. So it's not like it's a stagnant number that 20 years from now we're still going to be getting today's rent. So it has to be properly managed. It's not something that's going to make somebody rich, but anybody that invests and owns the property. I'll be honest with you, way back when we talked about it originally, I wasn't against sales. The challenge with sales is if you put a limit on the first couple of units, when they go to sell it, as inflation grows above your cap, the gap between the house that you sell and the house the person wants to buy has grown. So you've actually set them up for a disadvantage. If you put any kind of sales cap on it, say a 3% sales cap, if everybody else's house is going up 10%, then you're actually holding that person back by a 7% growth rate. And so you actually hurt somebody by doing the sale of the property. And then if you don't put a cap in, the second time it's no longer affordable housing, it's gone. So either way, it either hurts the person because the gap is growing, or it actually loses it out of the affordable housing stock. So, I mean, I certainly, we've been in the background and watching this for nearly a year. And so, I mean, we've been watching people kind of come in and want to make one more small change and everything else. I think that some of the changes that are being suggested tonight may or may not make it better. I may suggest, short of maybe Maggie, that we're all going to be retired 30 years from now. So I don't know if we can plan 30 years into the future and everything else. I think that's a kind of a little bit of a challenge. But I do think that planning well, the big part of it that I think Todd brought up is we need that level of density if you're going to bring water to a project, bring sewer to a project, and you're going to maintain the project. If you're asking to build 75 units over there, you will get nobody interested in building that number of units on that side's parcel of land. By the time you're bringing water and sewer to it and you have to maintain your taxes, maintain everything else there, you just won't get anybody that can do it, never mind wants to do it. But I believe it's a sustainable project well into the future, well beyond my retirement.
And the risk that Councilor Brew raised about buildings falling into disrepair, that risk also exists with every rental property currently existing, both apartment houses and single-family homes owned by investors.
Even single-family homes owned by people that own them don't keep up their homes. I walk by a few of those every once in a while.
And the same is true of condominium buildings, that frequently condominiums are undercapitalized, and then the owners get big surprises when they have to replace a roof or fix a bunch of leaky pipes or things
That
of
was
that
the
kind.
point I was going to make about the need for reserve funds.
Yeah, but I think that that's the whole point, though, is that there's multiple types of housing.
Yeah.
They're not all going to be in this particular ordinance that we're talking about today. And we have put single-family homes in there right now. You can't put one in that isn't on a half-acre lot. So you can't, and that's in the RA. Go to RB. What's it up to?
For almost an acre.
Yeah, it's an acre. So you cannot build anything that isn't actually for a well-to-do person in our town based on even the lot sizes, because a lot of the expense in homes for single family, until we change our zoning, is creating unaffordability right off the bat, because you cannot buy a lot for under a couple $100,000, and then you got to put a house on it. So until we get density in our single-family home stock properties, we're still going to be challenged on single-family homes and affordability.
Did you?
I'm all set.
You all set? Okay, yes.
Does anyone have a motion to change anything in this ordinance? If they
Only
if they don't,
suggestions, nothing, no formal motion. Would you like to make a motion?
There's a motion already on the table.
Yeah, we're on discussion, so.
Okay, so it's discussion, right.
There's a
So-
motion that takes out two of the whereases in the first
Right,
page.
Right, but other than that,
other than that,
So, how much more discussion, and we have a vote?
and,
yes,
I'd like to suggest we move the question then.
all right. We'll do is there a second to move the question?
I'll second that.
Second, Councillor Lund. Let's do a vote, a roll call vote, and then we'll start here.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Cy Nadell, aye.
James Bubar, nay.
Heather Grant, aye.
Councillor
Em
Friedrich?
Friedrichs, nay.
6 to 2, we've moved the
6 to
question.
2, we have moved the
Was that to
question.
move the question? Or
Yeah,
Yes, that was to move the question.
Yes. So now, we need to vote on the actual motion. So I'll start in the same corner.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Cy Nadell, aye.
James Bubar, nay.
Heather Grant, aye.
Councillor Friedrich?
Em Friedrichs, nay.
So it passes.
It passes.
Passes 6 to 2.
6 to 2.
Very good, okay.
Thank you.
Yes. And Randolph, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yes, thanks for coming. And putting up with this.
Oh, what's next?
I've got some unfinished
some new business with you later on.
Yes.
He can run, but he can't hide.
I gotta
That's
figure out
right.
where we are.
Sorry about that. We're going to take a little time to do our roundtable and approval of minutes before we revisit with planning board folks. All right. A roundtable. I'm happy to start. Human Rights Commission met on December 4th. We had that presentation that's been described tonight that Sally Tobias gave us. And we had a short discussion of a letter that's in the works to support Indigenous Peoples' Day that can be taken by our local legislators to perhaps make a change, being offered and offer a bill that would allow us to continue to use Indigenous Peoples' Day in place of Columbus Day as now required by the state. And our next meeting is February 5th from 4:15 to 5:45. I should also say that we, 2 meetings ago, we passed a motion to include Leslie Schwartz, and she was able to be part of our meeting right off. So there are now 5 residents, voting members of the Human Rights Commission, and Todd and I serve as non-voting members. So that's it. Anybody else?
Yes, excuse me, the Department of Parks and Recreation was happy to see the tour at Jackson's Landing that happened with the counselors on last Monday. And the Department of Parks and Recreation continues to focus on Jackson's Landing as well as Woodbridge Park in terms of making, coming forward with recommendations from a study that's ongoing. The meeting this month has been canceled, and the next meeting will be on January 28th for the Department of Parks and Recreation. The Seacoast Economic Development stakeholders had a Zoom meeting about the daycare challenges currently existing in the Seacoast, and suggestions for what may be done. And that's an ongoing discussion amongst the towns. The third thing was the UNH master plan that was presented. There were a number of counselors that were there, and something that I think the council may want to do in order to help that project along is to move this PUD ordinance forward, probably maybe faster than we may have expected, so that development that would actually benefit the town with tax dollars could actually occur there. And the PUD would, the planned unit development for the area, I believe, would help that happen. So other buildings could be built besides just the university buildings. And with flexibility. So that's my report.
The Conservation Commission is meeting next Monday night.
Wow.
And that's the next meeting since the last one.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, yes. The Energy Committee met on December 3rd. The main topics there were there's the Seacoast Challenge for opting up in the CPCNH, and also we have some proposed changes to site plan regulations to that would require new developments to include EV charging capability. That has been forwarded to the town planner to discuss with any other relevant parties, as well as to the police and fire departments. So, so we would be likely to forward that to the planning board in either January or February. Okay, the Historic District / Heritage Commission met on December 5th. We had one application to for window treatments at 15 Main Street. The decision was to approve installing exterior storm windows as a preference to replacing the existing wooden frame windows with vinyl windows. And the Historic District Commission also set their meeting dates for 2025. The meetings in January, July, and October will be on the second Thursday instead of the first, to avoid respectively the New Year transition, 4th of July, and Yom Kippur.
Makes sense.
The Land Stewardship Subcommittee met on December 11th. Most of the discussion was about Oyster River Forest management priorities, mainly making the trail accessible all the time. I suggested, well, this is being recorded, isn't it? The little beavers are being active out there. So that was most of the discussion. Bridges, fords, things like that, to deal with the high water out on the trail. We also were introduced to the new land stewardship coordinator, whose name is Veronique, and I don't know.
Luddington.
Luddington. And she and Anne and Sarah are supposed to meet or have met to kind of do the transition from Sarah to Veronique. So that's, next meeting is on January 8th. Thank you.
I don't know that we have Councilor Friedrichs with us.
Yeah, Councilor Friedrichs is still
Oh,
here.
there she is. Do you want to do your report?
Sure. From the planning board, there was ongoing discussion of the changing the 3 unrelated rule, and there were several public comments concerned that essentially the proposed language was swapping out 3 unrelated to basically 4 unrelated. And so there was some ongoing discussion about how to clarify the changes that would be made and to hear more of the public's concern as the planning board continues to work on that ordinance. We also saw there's a proposal to redevelop the old, I think it used to be a Cumberland Farms site, but the abandoned building that's next to the, I think it's the mobile station, between that and Nick's Bricks, into a Dunkin' Donuts for the Dunkin' Donuts at the Irving station to move across the way. And there was also, the planning board is continuing to review some different phases of site plan proposal, site plan improvements to the current Mill Plaza, and receive public comments from those. So those are the major projects that the planning board is considering. There is also some concern expressed that in a past decision of a subdivision on Durham Point Road, where there was a portion of the properties within the wetland overlay district, that there's been significant intrusion and grading in the wetland overlay in violation of the ordinance. And so there's some follow-up that Michael will be doing on that. And the planning board will, I guess, learn more about what happens when applicants violate our zoning ordinances and what the next steps are there. And I don't know if Councilor Grant wants to add anything to that as well.
Nope, that was a good, thorough overview.
Anything else? Councilor Friedrichs? No, okay.
Nope. So the Housing Task Force met last Monday, but I was at the Jackson Landing, and then I didn't follow back up with it, or reviewing what was going on, so I'll have to update you on the next session.
January 6th.
On January 6th. Sorry.
There was a meeting of IMAC on December 4th, and we discussed the composting challenge that had concluded. and other composting issues. One of the things that came out was that potentially we could use better signage at the transfer station regarding composting, so that people actually knew where it was and that it was there. And then a prior meeting, there was a discussion that people in town don't necessarily even know where the transfer station is. There's no signage on 108 that says take a left or take a right, depending on where you're coming from.
These are grown-ups.
Pardon?
I thought in the, just along those lines, sorry to interrupt, one of the issues is getting permission from the DOT to put a sign up on 108.
There is no sign, but the point was there's no
Right, there
sign
is no
there and
sign.
not everybody knows where it is. And God knows there's enough signage on roads, I don't know what the problem is, but I'll believe that.
They have to be residents of the town to use the transfer
I
station.
thought we weren't supposed to interrupt people.
Yeah, let him finish his report, and then we can blab.
Yeah. And there was a discussion on the leaf brush collection. And it was pointed out that 20% of the residents utilize the town service. And although then we just went on to a general discussion of composting, which is really, I think the current theme of IMAC right now is how to improve composting in town. Expand it.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. Anything else from this group? Then it's
Sure.
Town Administrator Southing's turn.
So let's see, first is the town clerk's office has been notified by LHS Associates. This is the company that manufactures the automated, updated voting machines, that it is unlikely we will receive delivery of our 2 machines by the next town election date of March 11th, 2025, because of a variety of delays with the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office in approving aspects of the process and machines. And so they are hopeful that we will receive them sometime in April or sometime thereafter. So that is unfortunate, but we will continue to monitor that. Across our different departments, and particularly in the business office and in our office, we are transitioning to end-of-year activities. So this entails building the annual town report, collecting everybody's reports, reviewing it, editing it, my producing an end-of-year report, and in the business office, dealing with all the financial end-of-year reporting and getting everybody's final purchase orders and invoices in. Looking ahead to next year, now that the council's approved the budget, Public Works is looking at Phase 3 of the Madbury Road Complete Streets project. And because we have excellent pricing with the bid that we've currently worked through for Phase 2 and 1, as long as Public Works is confident that pricing is very competitive and better than the market, they are interested in extending or amending the current bid contract with our current contractors and having that pricing extend to the next phase. So we will monitor that, but if in fact it looks like that is the most advantageous pricing, that's likely going to be our path forward when we come to you in January for a bid modification and award for the next phase. And then the last item is something I was really pleased with, which was last Wednesday I attended the training and qualifications for a number of our police officers. They divide the number of officers into groups and do a day of training and qualification with firearms. And so I want to just tell you about the training. The morning began with a class from 2 of our firearms instructors on the use of force and a complete review of when use of force is justified and when it's not. And there was a lot of conversation around this, which was excellent. The conversation and training then moved to a review on the application of handcuffs and how to maintain your handcuffs, how to apply your handcuffs, and everybody in attendance had to practice putting them on and taking them off in all the particulars around that. Then the training focused on doing a search of somebody, if somebody is arrested, to make sure they don't have any dangerous objects on them, and there was practice around that from all the officers. And from there, we went to the White Birch Armory, which is a firing range, an indoor range, and the two instructors, who are Durham officers but specially qualified, they provided basic fundamentals of shooting for all the officers, and they allowed me to participate in this as well. So it was an excellent review of how to place your feet, how to place your hands, how to holster a weapon, how to take it out of the holster, how to aim well. And then the officers then went through a series of first practice and then trials to actually qualify with their various firearms at different distances, in different scenarios, in a daytime scenario, low light scenario, nighttime scenario. And you may not know, I didn't know, the officers actually have a small flashlight at the bottom of their weapon, and they reviewed how to activate that, how to turn it off. And so it was an excellent day. It began at 8 and went until 4, and I departed at 4, but some of the officers were still going through their qualifications to be certified, so that the purpose is the review, but also to make sure the officers' marksmanship is up to par, because if the officers discharge their firearm, you want them doing it well. And I thought another really important takeaway, and this was focused on time and time again, was that each officer is responsible for every round they fire. So they need to make absolutely sure what they're shooting at, what they intend to do with that bullet, and they have to account for that bullet. And so it's not as though officers sort of pull up in a wartime scenario and are indiscriminately shooting. They're responsible for every single round. And I thought that was excellent, and it's something I hadn't thought about. So I found it instructive, and I was excited to tell you about it too. They use 3 types of weapons. One is their Sig Sauer P320 service revolver, or it's a clip magazine. It holds 17 rounds. They then used their 12-gauge shotguns and practiced and qualified with those. And they also have a rifle, which is the AR-15 style rifle that they keep in their vehicle. And they practiced with those and had to qualify with those as well. So again, a very good training day for everyone. Thank you. That's all.
Did you qualify?
No, I was not trying to qualify. They did let me discharge some of the weapons, and I appreciated the opportunity to do that. So, thank you.
Okay. Any more roundtable, anything? Approval of the minutes. We didn't get to November 18th, 2024 minutes at a previous meeting, and then we have December 2nd, 2024. I'm going to go ahead and read the motion for the minutes of November 18th. I move the Durham Town Council does hereby approve the Town Council meeting minutes for November 18, 2024. Is there a second? Then we can discuss.
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion? Anything that anyone did that was substantive change?
Yeah, I had a minor correction, but nothing substantive.
Okay.
I had a correction, and I dropped it on the floor.
Is it substantive? Is it substantive?
There's a vote was taken to stop discussion, and it was 6-3 in favor, but there were only 5 names there. Mine was missing. So I did vote for the motion, but I'm not in.
So that, could you just send that to Karen?
I could if I know how to contact her, sure.
Just
Okay.
not just our Karen, our Karen.
Karen,
Our Karen,
send it to
okay.
Karen
Yeah.
She does,
Yeah.
she does
So-
updates, so
yeah, okay.
if you would send that, that'd be
I
great.
will send it to her.
Anything else? All right. So do a roll call for the motion to accept the minutes. I'll start. Cy Nadell, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
Councilor Friedrichs?
Aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
All right. And I will do the same. I can do it in slightly different order. Does someone have something substantive that was a change for the minutes from December 2nd?
Okay, there was one of the votes where the, one of the committee appointments where part of the motion was missing from the minutes that were provided.
Okay.
So this was... Okay, this was on page 7, line 11. Okay, what should be read is, appoint Chris
Oh, yeah.
Gowland
So
to fill an alternate membership position on the Parks and Recreation Committee with a term expiration of April 2027. Then Councilor Friedman, et cetera.
Okay. Did you send that to Karen?
Yeah, I sent that to Karen along with several other minor corrections.
Okay. Did you, okay. So, I would say then, I move the Durham Town Council does hereby approve the Town Council meeting minutes for December 2nd, 2024 as amended.
I will second.
A second from Councilor Lund. Roll call vote. I'll start again. Cy Nadell, aye. We can go this way this time.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Darrell Ford, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
James Bubar, aye.
Okay.
M. Friedrichs, aye.
Good, thank you. So, new business. This is for amending, for ordinance 2025-01, amending Chapter 175 zoning, Article 2 definitions, Article 12.1 use and dimensional standards, Article 15 flood hazard overlay district, Article 16 aquifer protection overlay district, Article 17 Durham Historic Overlay District, Article 18 personal wireless service facilities overlay district, Article 20.1 standards for agricultural uses, and Article 23 science and communications devices, with a public hearing can be set for February 3rd, 2025. So, comments, questions, please join us up front.
That's what I'm wondering.
Why not in January?
Because it'll be more in January.
We only have one meeting in January, on January 6th, and
Not enough time.
if the timing was a little tight.
Right, I had the same question,
Yeah.
that answers it.
Okay.
No.
That the meeting's already too crowded.
Yeah.
If for some reason we aren't able to finish
Yeah,
before
and-
our time.
And there was one other rationale around it, which is, and that was a question I was going to pose a little later as part of your discussion. If the council feels that an opportunity to meet with Michael Barrett one-on-one would be helpful, we wanted to make sure there was plenty of time to do that, to talk about the definitions, rationale behind it. Or if a group of councils were interested in getting together with Michael Barrett, we could organize a special work session to do that as well. So the extra month gave plenty of time to talk about that, if you wanted to.
Okay, I have one question, and it's, I had this same question with the previous iteration, which concerns the definition of fall zone on page 68 and the accompanying figure on page 69. You define the fall zone as having a diameter equal to the height of the antenna. And I was wondering, did you mean radius rather than diameter? Because the worst case scenario is this thing breaks at the base and it's going to fall over a distance equal to the height.
Are you thinking this will go in one direction?
This is.
Yeah. In case it does go one direction, that was my concern.
That's for.
Well, actually,
This
let's
isn't
see.
the wireless-
Oh, the diagram, there's a diagram that, so that is what's intended, right? Because the diagram shows the the diagram equals the height. I mean, the diameter equals the height.
But does that adequately define the fall zone?
Because it's probably
Well, that's what,
This is taken verbatim from the wireless, this isn't our writing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this particular section, which is the Personal Wireless Service Facilities Overlay District, right? So
Right.
these definitions and such are taken from a federal authority.
Okay, so for some reason they've defined
We did not
it
do
as...
this.
I think they're assuming that most towers will crumple rather than totally collapse.
Or the top might collapse, but it's guide all the way down.
Yeah, most of them. I mean, a monopole, but I think they generally will crumple to their radius, to half their height or so.
This is also only on ground-mounted antennas, not roof-mount or pole-mount.
But I mean, you could extend the fall zone if you chose. If you thought that was unreasonable, you can certainly set it. This is our ordinance.
Right. Though if an agency of the federal government is defining it, then, well, I mean...
There's something wrong with it.
Yes, it probably isn't right.
That just bumps the issue up to a higher level of government.
No, but this is our ordinance. You can set it however you see fit.
Well,
I think the description of how it falls is helpful. It's not just falling from its base. That would be, might be reason for others.
And why it falls. We have had vandalism on towers before, and if somebody cuts a guy wire, it's going to come down and it doesn't crumple.
Yeah, there's three kinds of towers: a guide tower, with the cords, a lattice tower, and a monopole. You're a physicist, so.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you're not a specialist in personal communication.
Right. I'm a physicist, but not a materials scientist. I suspect that with a monopole, it's not going to crumple. But
so the fall zone they're talking about isn't the tower falling. If you read the last sentence in the definition, it's for ice and things like that falling off the tower.
Or collapsing material.
Yeah.
I had a 100-foot tower in Vietnam we used for radios and snipers, and a truck hit it and it went this way. It did not crumple. It came down and landed on a building.
If the fall zone is essentially the height of the tower, then what's the issue? Why do you want to make it smaller?
It's not the height of the tower, it's half the height.
It's half.
Yeah. It's specified as a diameter equal to the height instead of a radius equal to the height.
Yeah.
So it can only half fall.
Well, it's for stuff falling off it. I don't think it accounts for the whole thing going over.
Right. So,
we have the ability to change its radius if we want.
I think that it's going to start a domino effect, I think.
Yeah.
If we do that, we better be looking at the rest of it. There's something else that
Well, not only that, there wasn't
refers
anything
to
that
the
we
fall
changed
zone.
on it, we just moved it, right?
If we want to change something, we'd have a motion.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying though, is in this particular section, we didn't make any changes, we just moved it,
Okay.
right? We didn't actually change any of the
Right.
verbiage. So it's not something that was originally
Okay.
edited.
Yeah.
But if you want to do it now, you can.
So a lot of it's because they're relocated.
It was a relocation.
Anything else? If people see items that they were concerned about?
I haven't had a chance to look at, so, again.
I mean, it seems to me like Councillor Lund's observation is a correction to perhaps what was an oversight in the original definition.
Right.
Does anybody want Michael or Paul to point out anything that's changed beyond relocation?
In particular, what was revised since the last time this was before the council?
Oh, maybe I should also send you a copy of when it came to the council, you had a lot of comments, and then that went back to the planning board, and the planning board, they went through all of them carefully, and they incorporated a number of them, but a number of them they did not. They didn't think they should. And there were a number of proposed changes to the table of uses, which they didn't want to deal with. They thought best to hold off till we actually do the table of uses in the future as a rewrite. If it'd be helpful, I can send you what I sent to them, but there's a lot of colors in it. I don't know that it would be helpful.
I think it would be useful to have, in addition to the red and blue, green that would tell us what has been changed from the previous iteration that the council saw, so that we could focus our attention on those sections, because the rest of it we've seen before.
Yeah, I'll have that for you for the next meeting or the hearing.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. So we certainly can move this to the next meeting, but encourage everyone to do that work before the meetings, because we think it could be a very busy night.
When you say next meeting, you talking January or
I'm talking
February?
about January 6th.
Okay, not the February 3rd meeting.
No, I mean.
Okay.
Right. It would be February 3rd if we were to advance this to a public hearing.
Correct.
But
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it does mean that it would be helpful if Michael can get the information out, and then everybody's good about being ready when they come, with any motion, something you want.
So your
to
plan
change.
is to have this on the agenda for January 6th?
We will put it on January 6th, the agenda.
Right. Still at a first reading.
okay.
Continued discussion.
Continued discussion, but also sort of like the budget, if people can think ahead, questions that you have, or anything you want to turn into a motion, so we can go right to the motions, and maybe move that process along.
January 6th?
Yes.
Is that the public hearing? That's not the public
No.
hearing.
That's not the public hearing.
No.
That would,
Be in February, presumably.
right.
Unless we need to
January
move it.
6th would be basic, the further discussion and first reading.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything they'd like to see addressed tonight, or they're good with just postponing? Looks like postponing. All right. In that case, does anyone have anything else they want to add to this meeting before we have a final motion? Not seeing any. Is there a final motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
That's Councillor Lund and Councillor Ford. So roll call vote. Would you like to start?
Darrell Ford, aye.
Eric Lund, aye.
Wayne Burton, aye.
Joe Friedman, aye.
Sally Nadell, aye.
James Fubar, aye.
Heather Grant, aye.
Oh, thank you. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
That didn't show on.
So where did the
This
where did the
meeting is
turtle-
adjourned.